I think,
Is it live?
am I visible?
Okay.
We are live, we are live, we are live, and everybody is audible and visible.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I welcome everyone who watches and listens and reads the content of Op India for this, I think, perhaps the most awaited conversations, stroke debates, stroke discussions, stroke fights or street fights or whatever it may be, ultimately whatever it morphs into. But this is something that I was certainly looking forward to since last evening. And I look forward to listening to each of these brilliant panelists, Arihant Pawariya, Ashish Dhar, Madhusudan, and Ravilochanan Iyengar, with their perspectives on each of these different aspects of the issue. Broadly, what is it that we hope to cover is one, our respective understanding of the genesis of caste, its current application or relevance or contemporariness, and what is it that we believe should be the way forward. And we hope to address several issues which are perhaps corollary or concomitant to this larger issue. And the format of the debate, as Nupur already put out, is I think each participant gets about 5 minutes to present their opening positions, post which each of them gets an opportunity to pose rebuttals for 3 minutes each. And they will have to identify the person that this particular question or their questions are being addressed to or directed at. And the person gets 3 minutes to respond to those questions. Once we are done with this, we take questions from the moderators, hopefully 2 follow-up questions each to each of the panelists, and then we throw the questions open, or rather the session open to the audience for their questions. There is a decent chance that some of our questions, as part of the moderator's questions, could actually be from the audience questions itself. Be that as it may, we will try and ensure that as many questions are taken as possible, because I think this session has attracted a lot of attention and the backdrop to the session, of course. So I hope to hear the erudite views of each of the erudite panelists, and let's have fun. So let's start.
One second, I'd like to say something. Thank you, all of you, for agreeing to do this. I know that there has been a lot of background talk to why we are all here. Let's try and ensure that everybody sticks to their designated time slot so that everybody gets a chance to talk. Let's keep it civil, which I'm sure all of you will. And may the gods be with us tonight as we go into this debate. So we are going to start alphabetically as far as opening remarks are concerned. So, Arihant,
mics, right?
Yes, the rest of us can mute our mics when the opening remarks are on.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Nupur. Thank you, Sai. First of all, we should all remember the upcoming August 5 event, that we should, recognize the importance of our Hindu identity, the importance of keeping our traditions intact and protecting it, and the importance of coming together and achieving. If we all come together and achieving, that's what we should focus on, whatever the content, whatever the debate we have today. So starting with the topic, of course, caste discrimination. First of all, I would like to say that we should avoid the usage of the foreign words like caste and focus on our own words like jati and varna, which will give us a better perspective, a better understanding, and resolving our differences, whatever they are. So, as Nicholas Turks, a renowned scholar on caste, he mentioned, why I'm saying this is that the caste, the word, if we use caste, then it has certain connotations from the West, from the Portuguese, if we take that. Then, he pointed out that, as I will just quote him verbatim, he said that using that word caste, it created an impression that under the British system, it became a single term capable of expressing, organizing, and above all, systematizing India's diverse forms of social identity, community, and organization. So this is something we have to look at. Now, let's look at the history, genesis of Varna system. I believe that it is not central aspect of Hinduism. Sanatan Dharma existed before the birth-based Varna system came into place. We know from the scriptures, from Vedas, that there is no mention of birth-based Varna system. We have mention of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and their respective roles. But it was not birth based. Now, as we progress as a society, around 1000 years, 1500 BC, we start seeing that rigidity is taking place, and this is also attested by the DNA evidence from 2000 years ago, that the endogamy is settled in, and then it is enshrined in the society. So we also see that from the Vedas, we don't have that mention of birth-based varna, but as we move to Puranas, Brahmana texts, and Smritis, we start seeing the even codification of the existing mores. So that is briefly I want to touch upon the what is the genesis and how it is transformed from non-birth based to birth based system. Now, the another aspect is the contemporary discrimination that we have today. Uh, Most people, as we have seen, that people have been asking us to include that person, this person from that caste. They assume that it is a simple caste system with rigid hierarchy, where one caste is Brahmins oppress the others, or OBCs oppress others. So I would just like to highlight the complexity of the system, caste system, is that even though Brahmins are demonized for persisting with the caste system for the last 70 years, we don't have a Brahmanized system or state-sponsored casteism in favor of the upper caste. So even then, we have not been able to abolish the system, and the most of the atrocities that are committed today, if we take the case studies, if we take the data, if we go by that, then we will find that most of the atrocities on lower castes are committed by OBCs and other castes taught by the Brahmins. Another thing is that I want to highlight is that it's not so simple. We have witnessed that the so-called lower castes, where they are in majority, are found in some instances committing atrocities on the so-called upper caste.
We have 1 minute
These may be exceptions.
Arihant.
Yeah. What?
I said you have 30 seconds left.
Okay.
For your 5
So
minutes.
this is just, I want to highlight the complexity of the system that is practiced as today. Now the way forward, as I said, we have, personally I feel that the caste system that we have today is dehumanizing to most of the people, and it should be abolished. And for me, I think the Hindu identity takes precedence over caste system, but we have to understand that we cannot abolish the caste. We must try to abolish the caste based discrimination. Abolishing caste or annihilation of caste is a fool's errand, that I personally believe. So going forward, our focus should be on productive areas like ending the discrimination in birth based caste discrimination or
Arihant.
superiority. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Arihant. Next, we have Ashish. Could you please take the floor and give us some big remarks?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
audible.
Am I audible? Right. So first of all, many thanks to Op India and Nupur and all the co-panelists for joining this discussion. As this has been triggered by my tweets from a few days ago, it is incumbent upon me to clarify and clearly lay out the intent and objective of sticking my neck out on this controversial topic. So let me articulate my position on the matter as clearly as I can. Right. Number one, in my opinion, it is extremely critical for Hindus to have a crystal clear view of the Varna Vyavastha as it was practiced in pre-colonial times, primarily for two reasons. A, caste is the stick that is used to beat us in academia, in the media, in popular culture. And unless we have a reasonably clear view of what jatis essentially are, we will continue to be shamed into submission. So for me, decolonization calls for an honest encounter with the realities of pre-colonial India, and that without feeling obligated to spit on the faces of our glorious ancestors. B, India's contemporary political discourse is deeply casteist, and yet, despite being independent for more than 7 decades now, caste-based problems don't seem to be going away. In fact, they are only increasing by the day, getting more horrid. This despite reservations, this despite legislations like the SC/ST Atrocities Act, uh, antiques like burning of Manusmriti, and all these dramas. Point number two, based on my reading on the subject and interaction with various scholars, I understand that the problems of caste have their genesis in the colonial times. With the breakdown of traditional institutions and a profound disruption in the socio-economic life of the people of India. So I argue here that the so-called lower castes fell on bad days not because of, but despite the Varna Vyavastha, right? Not because of the Varna Vyavastha, but despite the Varna Vyavastha, I repeat. Because Varna Vyavastha, I view as like I mentioned in the tweet, a nature-nurture matrix and a social security net that was formalized at some point in the past. Number three, I vehemently disagree with the colonial narrative of systematic exploitation of the so-called lower castes of pre-colonial India. When I look at the material achievements of the Hindu civilization, I see temples, sculptures, paintings, art, and unparalleled craftsmanship. All this to me is plain and simple Shudra glory, right? To deny these jatis their place of pride in history has been a failure of the Indian English educated elites of today. And to be honest, if I'm ashamed of anything, I am ashamed of these modernistas. Number four, in this context, it is important to understand the role of the Dharma Shastras in pre-modern Hindu society. They were not edicts or commandments, but a crystallization of centuries of experimentation and an expression of the will of a free people, much like the Constitution of India is intended to be. I don't know if it does that, if it is able to do that. That Sai Deepak would be a better person to answer, but at least the intention was there. Number five, instead of obsessing over what Manusmriti says, what the Upanishads say, without even doing a cursory reading of the texts, the point of our collective interest should be the link between colonialism, global capitalism, ecological crisis, technological revolution, and land reforms in free independent India, and the current status of the so-called lower caste jatis, because these are all interlinked issues according to me. In other words, the problem of casteism has economic as opposed to religious roots. And I'm keen to hear what the economists on the panel have to say about these things. Number six, there is
You have 30 seconds.
yeah. Number six, there has been much tom-tomming of Hindu political unity recently, and I believe that the Hindu ideal is harmony between jatis and sampradayas, and not the idea of a monocultural unity popularized by some famous Twitter handles. Their attacks on Puranas, on tantric practices, Murti Puja, and anything that they don't basically understand are attacks on Sanatan Dharma. And their their project of destruction of jatis is nothing less than the end of our civilization. And just my last thing before going, I just want to say that I come to the discussion with an exploratory mindset. And I believe that anyone who makes a claim that or who holds a firm, non-negotiable position on the complex realities of caste is either an ignoramus or has malicious intent. Reducing caste to a colonial trope is simply not acceptable. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ashish. Next, we have Harsh. Harsh, please.
Thank you, Nupur. First of all, I think it shows the beauty of Dharma that all of us, despite various... Can you hear me, Arihant? Okay,
You're
okay. So, despite all the... Okay, sorry, he was just making a symbol.
Yeah, for some
So
reason,
despite
he's
all
not
the
audible
heated
to
discussions
me,
that we are
but
getting
it's okay.
together...
Carry on.
Okay, I'll continue then. So for, that we are able to disagree quite heatedly and still get together to discuss that, I think that's the beauty of Dharma. That kind of takfiri attitude of excommunication has not reached us yet, maybe despite some efforts. So I'll come straight to the point. We had this heated discussion because I called Ashish. By the way, I regularly delete my tweets. People who follow me, they know that. I did not delete any tweets before I got I deleted them before I got the invitation for this debate. But the thing that kind of led to the controversy was I called Ashish Dhar a rank casteist. And having listened to him for the last 5 minutes, I'm still not sure whether I should take it back or not. Let me explain why. So Ashish, and I don't think it's an ad hominem attack. I think it's a descriptive term, and I just want to go through it very rigorously. So, Ashish said that the link between Jati and Varna to birth is undeniable. Please don't distort the Shastras. I agree with him. If there is a Shastric interpretation which says that it is birth-based and your occupation is linked to it, which he said may or may not be his view, but he said that was the reality, then I totally reject that scriptural inscription. So then he wrote, well, but the important point is the question of authority in Dharma is critical to our survival. Right? This is exactly what he mentioned. The question of authority in Dharma is critical to our survival. He does not have a view, but he says self-congratulatory reformist bakwas. So my point on this is, okay, Dharma is has multitude. It's got a grand word. There are 500 million non-Indian Buddhists outside of India. There are many Westerners converting to various forms of Dharma or Dhamma. Within India, you have Arunachal Pradesh, you have non-Hindu dharmic panths. In Jharkhand, you have non-Hindu the Sarmaism. You have modern day gurus who say they reject any kind of caste and they promote inter-caste marriage. And the RSS says, including Bhaiyaji, Suresh Bhaiyaji, that Dalits should be allowed into temples. If any Shankaracharya, respected Shankaracharya, says otherwise, we reject that. So if there is a claim that these guys are not Hindus, I want to listen to that claim. So I believe that Dharma is the grand rubric on the top, where I believe the only common denominator is there is reciprocity in spirituality, unlike the Abrahamic proselytizing monotheist mindset. Within that, you can come to either Indic religions or Hinduism directly. Indic religions, I say, because some religions don't like to call themselves Hindu, even though substantially I think they are. And within that, if you come to Hinduism, not just, I was talking about the Honorable Puri Shankaracharya, the Honorable Dwarka Shankaracharya said Sai Baba is not a Hindu. So I've gone to the Sai Baba Mandir. I've also gone to Trimbakeshwar next to it. I have an intercaste marriage. About the intercaste marriage, Puri Shankaracharya said that intercaste marriage leads to bestiality. It will eventually lead to interspecies marriage. I can give you the video. It's on 3 minutes, 25 seconds. I can post it on Twitter later on. So when I listened to Ashish, what he was saying was, he said he does not have his own view, but he rejects reformism. So my question to him, if you cannot say that authority in Dharma, you can say Dharma ke niche Indic religions, uske niche Hinduism hai, uske niche Brahmanism hai. I am not excommunicating Brahmanism. I'm saying it is a subset. I'm saying you do not get to speak for the entire superset. The question should be the authority in the subset of Brahmanism. You cannot therefore say there is a question of authority in Dharma per se, and oh my God, you are not listening or fully agreeing with the four honorable Shankaracharyas. So it is critical to know that going forward, it's very good to know the theology and the history in the past. Going forward, should we believe in birth-based occupation, yes or no? A very clear answer would be required. I am horrified to think that you can say that a Dalit person cannot open a business, or that I cannot join the army. I come from a Baniya background, or some Brahmin person cannot open a business or cannot work on the farm. I think it should be all allowed to be mixed. I think a large part of keeping this system was rural violence, was a feudal society, and was endemic threats. And above all, it was about women not having their own agency, having their education, or being financially independent. Because women were not financially independent, they could not actually go out and do intercaste marriages, which according to some honorable people leads to bestiality. Again, I can put that link on there. So the question is, if there are a lot of people who are clearly Hindus who do not agree with this mindset, then we have to think of authority in a much smaller subset of Brahmanism, not Hinduism or Dharma per se. I'll just end up making a point about theodicy. Theodicy is the problem of evil in religion. So, the claim of this is, because you did good karma in your last births, you ended up being born a Brahmin, for example. You did bad karma, you ended up being born a Dalit, for example, and whatever in the middle. And they say, well, theodicy is a problem. Hinduism is one of the pure religions that solves it. And I think that's a beautiful point. But it is important to understand that theodicy need not lead to caste-based birth. For example, if I have an accident in going outside of this podcast and I die, I can think that because I did something wrong in my previous lives, this is the karma accumulated, which I am paying for. But it need not apply to birth-based jati and varna at a limited point, even if you go with accumulated karma. So I'll stop there, and I just want to say one small thing. I would like to take back what I have said, but I would like to first hear, whenever we go through it in a formalized, structured manner, that whether there should be birth-based occupation going forward, yes or no. Thank you.
We'll come to questions and counter questions in the next segment. So, in fact, we can introduce a 5-minute section where Harsh and Ashish can just hash it out, or a 10-minute segment where Harsh and Ashish can hash it out, and we can grab our popcorn. But in the meantime, Ravi ji, please, your opening remarks.
Okay. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Yeah, take it.
Yeah, you are. Please carry on.
So the primary thing is about genesis of caste. I would use the term jati. I am someone who doesn't prescribe to the view that caste as it exists now, or the caste problem came up only because of European interference into India. I mean, jati was not because of Europeans entering into India. Let me not worry about caste now, because I agree to an extent with what Arihant stated. But at the same time, the other view that there was Varna Vyavastha that degenerated into Jati Vyavastha, or that initially Varna was open to everyone. It's as though every kid was given an aptitude test, and then it was decided that X kid will be Brahman, Y kid will be Kshatriya or whatever. So this is some view which is there. Maybe as an answer to the claim that the early Vedic religion was casteist or whatever. I don't agree with that view either. What I say is that you have to first understand history, you have to be factual, you have to look without any bias at the old texts, at the practices, and whatever scientific literature is available with us. So the first thing, where did the jati come from? Jatis were actually endogamous tribes. So I'm quoting a research paper written by Arun Kumar and others in 2012, published in PLOS. So what it says, it is specifically about Tamil Nadu tribes, actually. So the so-called Brahmins' entrance into Tamil Nadu was never before 1000 BCE. That is the accepted statement by be it Westerners or anyone else for that matter. You don't see any Brahminical culture in the Tamil lands before 1000 BC, or at max perhaps 1200 BC. There is nothing on archaeology, which is a fact. So this paper states that though the Brahmins must have entered Tamil Nadu only 3000 years ago, 6000 years ago, jatis were already in existence. These tribes, like various tribal communities who are forming various jatis in Tamil Nadu now, each of them were endogamous, and to use the specific paraphrasing, they found strong evidence for genetic structure associated primarily with the mode of subsistence. In other words, fathers passed down their occupation and the way of life to their sons. So what I see is that we had too many endogamous tribes. India was a huge nation. There were too many endogamous tribes. The Vedic culture spread from its heartland of Saraswati civilization to the other parts. If you talk about genetic admixture, which Arihant mentioned, the same paper also mentions that the admixture happened between 2300 BCE to the first century of CE, which is exactly the time when the desiccation of Saraswati started. People moved out from their homelands to the other parts of India, and wherever they went, they started spreading the Vedic culture. This is where admixture of various genetic materials between the different peoples has happened, and by the first century, everything was once again fossilized. It is a period of some 2000 years. Anyway, this is the basic stuff. Now, coming to the point of jati, what has happened is all these individual endogamous tribes, they were taken as is and whereas into the Hindu mainstream. We accepted their deities as Kuladevatas, we accepted their rituals, we accepted their practices. They were given a space within the Hindu altar, and they were given a way to follow their occupation. which was already in existence. There was a stratified society. Dharma did not try to destroy anything. We don't have a practice of going and bulldozing things and putting something new over there. We accepted whatever was there. We just added a superstructure over it. That's it. We brought them under a single.
You have about 1 minute, Ravi.
Give the minutes. So
1 minute.
coming to the medieval era, the belief is that casteism apparently created trouble for everyone. You have to keep something in mind. There were no jati-based revolts in India, large-scale revolts, unlike serf revolts in Europe. There's a reason for it. Though there were some restrictions on certain jatis which followed some professions, they were compensated in a different manner. I don't say it was right, I don't say it was wrong, but look at it for what it was, learn it, and then speak about it. The compensation being that, for example, I'll give a specific example in Chengalpattu district of Tamil Nadu. The records are available even till 18th century. The so-called Harijans, they were not required to pay any taxes. They were not required to pay even their house tax. The backyard of their house was much, much bigger than others, where they could cultivate vegetables and stuff for themselves, not pay any tax. And finally, they were actually paid maniums, which were not subsidies, but actually right. They had a right over the village produce or the
Ravi,
services.
wrap it up, please.
Yeah, thank you. Please.
Okay, if you want to finish making your point in 5 seconds, you can. I don't want to cut you short.
No,
Okay.
see, my thing is that very simple. Jativada, as it is seen now, as either it was a great evil or there was nothing which existed as Jativada. Neither of those versions is right. It did exist, but it had a benevolent form, and it also had certain restrictions. Look at it for what it is. First, be descriptive without pushing your opinions upon what was in the past.
Okay. Just before we go to Sai, I would like to just answer one question. A couple of people, especially one Miss Usha, is asking me over and over again, and she said she won't stop till I answer her, saying, how can we have a panel discussion on caste and caste discrimination without representation from the oppressed community, which is scheduled caste and scheduled tribes or the Dalit community? I want to tell Ushaji that Ushaji, this is just the first step that Op India has taken in discussing certain contentious issues within Hinduism. This is an issue which we are introspecting on, and we are trying to reach a consensus only because there was a huge discussion that already happened on Twitter, and we are just trying to formalize that discussion in this debate. I assure you that going forward, we will have representation from all communities and all people, and we will carry forward this conversation in the coming months. So enjoy this debate, and I assure you we'll have following debates where your grouse will be taken care of. Yeah.
So I have two suggestions. I believe that each of the panelists perhaps needs 2 more minutes to make some of their points, because I suspect even Harsh had a couple of points to make. Okay. So here's what I would suggest. Initially, we had proposed 3 minutes for rebuttals and 3 minutes for responses from each party. So maybe we give them 5 minutes where they use 2 minutes for the points that they have left and the rest for the rebuttals. You get 5 minutes further, however you choose to use it, but that is the time that you get for further points as well as rebuttals. I have just one point to make, and it's important. See, the thing is, I don't want this particular panel discussion of the session to be accused of elitist discussion of caste without inclusion of the oppressed community. Okay, one, that's not the intention at all. There's a specific reason. To be honest and to be blunt, the genesis of this particular session is what has happened over the last 48 hours or more than that on Twitter. And since that discussion involved people, specific individuals, those individuals, along with a few more others, are being given an opportunity to thrash it out, because I certainly believe that this is an issue. Feminism, caste, and environment are 3 issues which are central to the civilizational debate, because these are the sticks that are being used against Hinduism by the other side. And therefore, this particular discussion was important so that people can let steam off in a civilized fashion without having to resort to a Twitter war or continue with it, because at the end of the day, that forum does not accommodate any kind of nuanced discussion. but this is not in any manner an attempt to exclude the people who are meant to be on this particular discussion, if I say so with a lot of respect, and with respect to all of these participants, and including myself. There are better informed people on the question of caste and on the issue of caste who are entitled to speak on this particular issue. Therefore, I don't think any of us, at least I can't pass off as remotely qualified to speak on the subject, which is why I have chosen consciously to stay out of this particular debate, but to only act as a moderator. So a clarification, I think this is a beginning, and we will certainly continue with this discussion because I think this is only going to start a few more questions. So I think why don't we go back to Arihant now? So 5 minutes each to each participant, however you choose to use it, but you get 5 minutes to basically address any further points that you have and then questions that you may want to pose to any other panelist.
And please mention the panelists so that we can then go to the panelists that you have posed the question to.
Okay, so one point I wanted to make, but I couldn't, was that the identities of Varna were very fluid. That is my reading from whatever I have read. And we have so many examples. And Raviji, I would like to, just few examples. We know Mauryas, Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas, all these kings, weren't they Shudras, these castes or these families? And weren't the Guptas were Vaishyas, and Shungas were Brahmana kings. So they also became kings. They did not have, if the system was rigid. I just want to understand your interpretation of this, because my reading is that the identities were not fluid. Some people say that these are exceptions and which prove the rule. But I want to understand from you, what is your take on this? Were they, if we have such elite examples from the society, when we are supposed to have the so-called Brahmanical system at its peak, right? We have so many kings from different castes, different varnas, who are becoming kings, who are not just kings. I mean, people born in Kshatriya family, they become Brahmanas. People born in Shudras, they are elevated to the highest status. So how prevalent was that? Was it just exception or just also kind of norm? Second, second question that I had, there are so many questions. This is about past. The contemporary discrimination, that is the main crux of the matter. Well, how do we solve that issue? So Ashish said that it's, it does not, he seems to be, in disagreement with the, Hindu unity. He had some things to say on that. So I would like more clarification on that. What he means, is that Hindu unity impossible to achieve, or it's okay. We have to be in harmony with each other. The castes have to be harmony with each other. That is our past, but we also face insurmountable challenges in the 21st century from the religions, from the the systems that are unified, that have more population than us, more power, more money power. So all these things, how do you see that? And do we not need Hindu unity? Does not the caste should become a secondary, and Hindu unity should take precedence in form of identity? So these are my two questions to you. Of course, I have a couple of more, so I can take it later. This is more in the sense that the effects of caste discrimination that I have, I want to ask Ashish. So we hear that so many people want to convert to Hinduism, especially Muslims, and the society does not accept those people back into the society. They don't want to, the rural system. It's not proper or politically correct to say, but they don't want to marry their daughters into the families which have been converted. So that's a resistance that is coming from that side. And the acceptance is not there. So what is the reason that a Hindu family does not accept a person marrying a Muslim girl, but a Muslim family readily accepts a Hindu girl? So I want to understand why that is. Is our society, Hindu society, exclusive, as people say, that this is the reason why we do not accept anyone. We are inward looking people. So I want to understand why is that, and not just Hindu families. We have seen examples of villages or panchayats, excommunicating people who marry a Muslim girl, the Hindu boys. So I want to understand that kind of discrimination, that kind of exclusivity. What is the reason for that, and the challenges it pose to the, we want more people. As the Hindutavadis would say, we want more and more people to convert back, to spread, become dharmics. So isn't that a big challenge? Whatever the reason for not accepting a Muslim bride is, isn't that a big challenge to, increasing our, Hindu followers? So these are my three questions to both of you.
Ashish, would you like to take the questions first, and then we can move ahead?
Yeah, sure. So before I get to the questions, I would like to make a comment that Harsh reached out and said, I mean, he just said that there were hard feelings on Twitter and all, and I think that we should put it behind us. It happens sometimes in the heat of the argument, so I think we should all move on and not worry about
Ashish,
that.
you will have to be a bit louder. I think
Now,
you're not as loud as you can be.
okay. Is this better now? Okay. So the first comment that I noted that Harsh made was about the agency of women and women not being independent. This is completely, absolutely contrary to all evidence that I have encountered in my reading of pre-colonial Indian society. Uh, and that is why I make the case again and again that people, when they comment on the realities of Jati and Varna, it is important that they first get a clear, reasonable view of uh, what society was like, right? And then things start falling into place. All of us have been, in some sense, indoctrinated by our education. I don't think anyone on the panel would disagree with that, and therefore, I always, suggest that it should be a thorough reading, or maybe a conversation with a scholar or someone who's done a deep study of Indian society or pre-colonial Indian society. Then we should form our opinions on this. So women not being independent is completely, absolutely off the charts. I don't think that is the case at all. Secondly, the question that I was asked on Twitter, and again Harsh repeated here, about should there be birth-based occupation. And the point that I have been making again and again is that it is not a moral question at all. This is how a society evolves. There are periods when there is endogamy, there are periods when there is intercaste marriages, there are periods when you have family linked occupation, there are periods like the Industrial Revolution came. There was a period where suddenly you had a huge demand from factories and industries, and then the whole nature of society changed. So who am I, or who is Harsh, to make that statement whether it should be there or not? Of course, these things are not imposed. If there is a view that birth-based occupation was imposed on Indian society, that is a false view, and I'll tell you why. One, uh, Raviji made the point about endogamy, and from my reading, like scholars like Dr. David Reich, he's one of the most authoritative sources of genetic studies in the world, and he says that Indian society has been largely endogamous. It consists of small groups of endogamous communities. And this has been so for the last 2000 to 3000 years, right? Now, if you go to the Dharma Shastras, right? So, Dharma Shastras acknowledge the existence of different types of marriages, 9 different types of marriages. Of course, there are restrictions and there are allowances, but intercaste marriage is not restricted, right? It is not a no, and dharma shastras give you ways to handle these situations, right? So obviously, one, it was happening, for which there were rules and regulations how it had to be done. And secondly, despite the sanction of the tradition, Dharma Shastras.
Ashish, you'll have to wrap it up in a minute or so, because we can always
Okay,
come
so
back
I'll
when
answer as many
we
points
are
as I
having a free-flowing
can. Yeah,
discussion. We
yeah.
can say more.
So as far as, so instead, in spite of the Dharma Shastras allowing intercaste marriages, uh, the fact that Indian society chose to be endogamous, largely endogamous, what does that tell you? It is not a Brahminical instruction that they were following. It just happened to evolve like that. These are organic choices that people make. So therefore, the question of whether there should be birth-based occupation or not is not even a question for me. It is not there right now, and I acknowledge that it is not there. If society changes, and again, in the post-industrial world, if you don't have jobs, and then again your occupation gets linked with who you are, which family you come from, and your skills get transferred from father to son, then who am I to say that it should not be there? So I refuse to pass a moral judgment on that. That is my position. Hope that makes it clear. Do I have time, or should I answer the other question? Arihant's question later.
I think we can take it up a little later, because I want everybody to ensure that they get their time in there. So I think we can move on to Harsh. Harsh, in case you want to make further comments or ask questions, please do.
Thank you so much, Nupur, once again. Thank you, Arihant. I've learned a lot from Raviji's comments as well. Very interesting. I actually read that study that the caste actually went from south to north. That's very few people actually know that. So what I acknowledge what Ashish has said, and in my future comments, what I'll do is I will not personalize it on Ashish. I would say my personal view is it is easy to take a normative view about what should be. Ashish has decided not to. I'll leave it at that point. Fine. So let's see. The idea that women have had agency in the past, I think it's laughable. I think Ashish himself would agree that he has made a assertion in his 5 minutes. Admittedly, he did not have much time. He did not give any reference or link. I've also read about the medieval times, and there were all kind of restrictions on widow remarriage and so on and so forth. I don't think that it would be fair to say that women actually had any kind of agency compared to modern times in earlier times. But once again, I'm also open-minded. I could be wrong. See, the larger issue in this case is very simple. I'm not saying this. It's that what we are defining as, see, that the word Hindu is not there in any of our shastras. In any of our earlier shastras, the word Hindu is not there. The word Hindu obviously was a geographical identity. It came from the word Sindhu, and the Persians could not pronounce and all that, and it became Hindu, right? And therefore, and later on, then what happened is, as the number of converts, Islamic converts, increased in India, it became all Indians minus the Abrahamic religions, because then Christians also started increasing in numbers. So since the word Hindu is not there, and it's kind of a negative identity in terms of count, even in our census, till very recently, when we did not have an option for other or atheist or so on and so forth, non-believer, it was Hindu was the negative bucket in which everybody was put. So my point is, if people want to say there is a certain adhikara, that there is a certain belief system, even if it is not enforced, I am interested in saying what is the morality of this going forward. I think history and theology is very interesting. But going forward, if people want to say that there is a question of authority for this system, then they should say it's a question of authority for the subset of the jati, people who believe in birth-based jatis, who I do not, in my worldview, for whatever that matters, it may not matter at all in the larger scheme of things, I am not excommunicating at all. However, if you go by certain comments, I'm not attributing it to Ashish. If you go by certain comments, it seems to say that if you do not believe in this, you are not a Hindu. If you do not believe in this, you're being excommunicated. It is true that there were pratiloma marriages and all that, intercaste marriages. The Dharma Shastras had 9 or so kind of marriages. But the problem was, if you were marrying across caste, there's a clear hierarchy there. I think one of the fascinating talks that Sai gave was at IIT BHU. I think somebody asked him a question on caste, and I think he did not, maybe did not have much time. But in one of the things he said, caste is horizontal; it was never vertical, hierarchical. And it might be true for the middle castes. It might be true in terms of cultural diversity, but at the very top and the very bottom, I'm sure it looked very different, especially at the very bottom. I'm a bit surprised that Raviji is saying that it is a benign system whereby the Dalits actually got benefits. If you're living outside the village, anyways, land is less valuable there. I mean, this really sounds, again, I'm not saying that this is Raviji's intentions, I'm simply saying that many of us have biases. To say that Dalits were somehow benefited in the system, when just recently, a girl was not even allowed to be cremated in the village in Uttar Pradesh by Thakurs. And then we see it all in Haryana and Uttar Pradesh, even in Tamil Nadu, that people have to go put the body from a bridge into the water below because they cannot cross upper caste lands with the body. We've not been able to give dignity in death to our people. And here we are being ambivalent. Let us be very honest. We are not explicitly saying this is wrong. Now, I agree with a significant point that Ashish mentioned. A lot of this is economics. Per capita,
Harsh, you have
about 1 minute, right? Yeah. So, for example, historically, we had about $500 per capita income, depending on how you adjust for inflation across the world. India is right now, in nominal dollar terms, $2,000 per capita. America, $60,000, right? I think somebody mentioned about what the economists take would be on it. I think as you urbanize, automatically this thing further and further dissolves. So, I mean, a large part of this discussion actually becomes beyond the point. But what is interesting is going forward, does the point of view that Shastra ordained birth-based jati, even if it is not followed, does it have certain prestige in our worldview, in our Hindu dharmic worldview? Does it have certain prestige? And if it does have certain prestige, there is no point saying there is propaganda against us. People are misunderstanding. Yeah, they will obviously misrepresent to some point, but there is no smoke without fire. We have to first make the problems in our own system go away before we constantly play victim. So I am here saying that if there is any Shastra which says there must be birth-based occupation, I am a full Hindu, I'm a full Dharmic, and I totally reject it. And I dare anybody to tell me that I'm less Hindu or Dharmic than them. And just one last point, 20 seconds. Arihant's point is very interesting. If we want to be a quote-unquote missionary religion again, if we want to expand and not just play defense, see, caste may have had certain values when you play defense. I'm not saying there are not nuances in our history, but if we want to quote play offense, a very different strategy is required. You now have a civilization that is transforming into a nation through a state, through one common independent democratic state. And now we can have a different worldview because we can afford to be aggressive going. I'll leave it.
That is also just one thing I would also like to add in this, what Harsh said, that whether you also support the missionary zeal, acquiring that zeal to acquire new followers, is that allowed in the Shastras? So please address that also.
Okay, so I think that point has been made. We'll go to Ravi ji, and then Ashish, if in 30 seconds or so you want to ask somebody a question, you can do that, because I think most of your time went in answering a question. So in case you want to ask somebody a question, you can do that in about 30 seconds after Ravi ji makes his points.
No. Just a second. I don't think that should be given to Ashish without the permission of other panelists, because you're giving 30 seconds to one particular participant. So please ask the
Okay.
I'm fine. I'm fine with it.
I don't need. I don't want to
Okay,
ask
you know
also.
what? Then great. So then Ravi ji will speak, and then Sai and I will ask 2 questions each to each panelist, and then we will throw the floor open for a free-flowing discussion. Ravi ji, please.
I'll first answer Arihant's question, because that is very close to what I wanted to say. So yes, Jati was set in stone. They were endogamous tribes which became part of Hinduism. Now, Varna Vyavastha was actually fluid. Jatis en masse could go up and down. See, the movement was not based on single individual. As I said, there was no aptitude test which was kept for these kids, and whoever passed it at 100% got one Varna, 30% got another Varna, or whatever. No, it did not work like that. What happened was, particular jatis by themselves, they could go up and down. There are examples of jatis which have gone up. Caste is one recent example. They are now treated as Kshatriya. The Rajbanshis of Kuch Behar, Panchanan Burma, he claimed that they had Kshatriya ancestry. At least in the past 1000 years, they were not known to have even underwent Upanayana Samskara. But they claimed Kshatriya ancestry. He brought the Brahmins. He got Upanayana for everyone. Now they are indeed identified as Kshatriya by everyone in the so-called Brahminical religion, as someone might call it.
Raviji, I'll just interject so that the point is a little clearer, because even I couldn't understand. So when you say that they have been accepted as such, who is the authority that is accepting either their upward movement or their downward movement? This is
It
what
is,
even I would try to like to understand.
see, in case of the Indic civilization, it is always the majority of the others. It is never a case of one pope declaring that these people have to be accepted as Kshatriya now. The point is, if you say the majority of the people around are okay to accept them as Kshatriya, fair enough, and that has happened throughout the history. There are examples where people have come down the jati scale, or Varna scale rather, entire sets of people. For example, the Gonds, they were most probably treated as Kshatriya. In fact, the way we see in their inscriptions from the early medieval era, they were definitely Kshatriyas. But unfortunately, post their defeat by the Muslims, they were forced into forest. They became proper forest dwellers. They could not do what their ancestors did for occupation, and they came down the ladder. Same with the Mewadi Rajputs who left on caravans because Mewar became a part of the Mughal Empire to a slight extent. So they also lost their Kshatriya or the Rajput status. And even in the very obscure past, you have an example of an entire royal clan being converted into Brahmins by Maharshi of the Bhrigu clan, because that clan was supposed to be killed by another king, and to protect them, he converted their Varna.
You have about 1 minute, Ravi.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I said you have about 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay. So this movement is something which has always happened. Now when you talk about killing jati, see, there are two different aspects here. One is about occupation and jati. It doesn't exist now. It is not going to exist in near future, as I see it. Perhaps in a post-industrial world, it may come back. I don't know, and no one is going to impose it on the society. But jatis per se, whether they can be destroyed, there is a question. And I feel it is tough to destroy jati completely, because most of the Hindu rituals, they are jati based. Every jati has its own specific rituals. When you marry into a particular family, you also marry into their rituals, their traditions, and their customs. You cannot deny that. So if you're going to destroy everything, what are you going to replace it with? I don't know. So I don't really see a way by which jati can be destroyed. Finally, I think it was Harsh who asked me some question. Harsh, can you please repeat it?
No, I did not ask a question. I made a comment, Raviji. I said that I am a bit taken aback by the insinuation, if not explicitly mentioned, that Dalits were somehow better off in this system of Jati Varna because they got some more land outside of the
Fair enough,
villages,
fair enough.
or
I'll
they
just
did
give
not
30
pay some taxes. And it is somewhat similar to the claim that
fair enough. I
women were
understand.
very very well off, because I can again quote you the
Unnecessary. I don't
Shankaracharya of Puri and what he
Sampradaya.
mentioned
Sorry.
about women, but I will not do that.
I don't know whether you understand it. Anyway, Nupur, can I have 30 seconds? Do I have some time? Or
If other panelists don't mind, because your time is essentially up, are other panelists okay with it? All right, everybody is okay with it. So sure, Raviji, go ahead.
okay, so here's the answer. The question about Benin situation was in comparison with the serfs of Europe or the post-British situation in India. It is not whether it's not a normative question. As I said, it is comparison, and in comparison, the situation was better, which is why there were no serf revolts like situation in India, because these people, for all their restrictions, also had certain benefits out of it. It was a system which was set up together by the people and not mere.
Yeah, that I agree with.
That's it.
I'm in agreement with you about comparing with Western Europe. I'm in
That's
agreement
what I
on
meant
that.
to say.
All right. So I think we've all made all the panelists have made their initial remarks and asked each other questions within the 5 minutes allotted. Sai, I think now we can move to asking moderator questions to the
Ashish is yet to
panelists.
answer my two questions. So I
Ashish is
think
there.
one was asked by Harsh also, so
I
that is
think,
also remaining, right?
okay. I think are all panelists okay with Ashish getting 2-3 minutes
Yeah.
more? Okay, Ashish, please answer. You're the all questions are.
I'm the privileged guy here. Okay.
Go
So
ahead.
one, before I go to the other questions, again about women, the status of women in India. We have so many names that we can rattle
Ashish,
off.
I will suggest that we leave it for my questions because I think you should focus on Arihant's questions.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'll get more time to do all
Okay,
of them.
right, right. So
Focus on Arihant.
I'll just finish this one, because this is important. Whether you have Gargi, whether you have Apala, whether you have the warrior Chitarangada, you have the matrilineal transmission, that is the property rights through women in Kerala. You have Manusmriti, which talks about respect for women, serving pregnant women even before the guests. You have this custom of sharing 1/4 of your property with your unmarried sisters. The brothers are supposed to do that. So this is a custom. Uh, you have the instance of Adi Shankaracharya uh, finally getting defeated in debate by a woman, not some great pandita. So you can easily make an estimate of the kind of learning that that particular woman, or an ordinary, and it is particularly important here that she was an ordinary housewife, right? Not some queen. uh, so, and artisan women, they held large tracts of land. So what is the basis of the claim that women did not have? You are, what Harsh is doing is that he is basically applying the lens of presentism on the customs of that age, and then making all these claims, while these bare facts are begging to be explained. So he can come back to me with
Ashish,
his thing.
once he is done, you respond.
Yeah, I'll just respond in 15 seconds. So once again, just like I told Ravi ji, I am ready to immediately concede the situation was better for women compared to, say, Europe at the same time. My claim is very different. My claim is women's position then, despite all the glorious exceptions you mentioned, and I totally acknowledge all of them, was not as good as it is now. It may have been further exacerbated in the colonial times. I'm not even ready to concede that. But even before that time, they were not as good as today. I'll just leave the claim at that. So you are, in that sense, your
Can I make
point of
a
presentism is
point
actually right. Your point of presentism is right. I am comparing it to the present only. I'll leave it there.
Can I
But
make
is
a
that
point?
fair, Harsh?
So both of you
Harsh.
can answer this question.
No,
Are we
sorry.
applying present moral standards to what was a completely
Yeah,
different
that's
time?
what Taleb would
No,
call
no. So
retrospective
I'll just answer
bigotry.
because Arihant
Yeah.
just also asked me the same thing, Nupur. Is it fair? I'm not saying it is about fair or not. I'm saying this system today is better. And by the way, this system today is where we do not follow birth-based occupation. Maybe a coincidence, may not be a coincidence. I'm
No,
not
you're
saying, I'm not
no
saying
that
that it is fair to compare or not. I'm simply saying it is better. And by the way, the social realities are moving in another direction. That is all I'll
No,
say.
no. So I think that's a serious claim, because first you're saying that you are not making a comparison, and then you're passing a value judgment of better. So that is a logical contradiction.
No, no, I am
Second,
comparing to the present. I am comparing to
right,
the present.
right.
I'm
So
not
that is the
comparing.
right. Okay, okay. So that is one, and the other fact is that you're looking at it through the minuscule, your set of your sample size of women around you, and you're not going. I mean, you're not going into the villages. You're not looking at the oppressed classes, for example. You're not looking at their condition today, and that the by
I can say the same
large amount.
about your historical examples. I can say the same thing
No,
about
I
your
am telling
historical
you,
examples.
I have given you examples of artisan women who were Shudras who owned large tracts of land. I can dig out the reference from where I'm making this
And
claim, and
we today have female billionaires. So
yeah, so that's fine. I'm not saying that today
that's
women
fine.
are not, but I'm talking about
I'm just saying
Shudras.
they're
You,
better.
you made the claim that they were not doing well. I'm not talking about Brahmin women only or Kshatriya women. I'm talking about Shudras, the artisans who owned lands, large tracts of land. They were rich. And so, I don't know where that claim comes from. So I'll go to the next one, which is Arihant's questions, the question of Hindu unity versus harmony. So Arihant, unity as such is basically an imposition of one standard, monoculture, on the entire lot of Hindus in this country, right? Um, when I say harmony, you can just picture what happened in Sabrimala. I am not an Ayyappa devotee, right? I have never been to Sabrimala, but I stood with my brothers and sisters who are devotees of Ayyappa, and we fought together, right? So even though I don't belong to that sampradaya, I watch out for their cause. I watch their back, in a sense, and make sure that their freedom is not attacked. So that is my idea of harmony, right? The other question is about converted Muslims, not accepting them back to the Hindu fold. So I see two reasons behind that, and I don't know why people get so agitated about this phenomenon and again attack caste blindly and like puppets. The first thing is, in the long history of Hindu-Muslim relationship in India, whenever such things have happened, Hindus have had to pay for their lives for doing such things, right? If you marry, like the case with Ankit Saxena, for example, he was beheaded for having an affair with a Muslim girl. So an this is not a one-off thing. This has been happening over and over again, and naturally, there is that fear. Secondly, and more importantly, uh, Hindu marriage and Abrahamic marriage are two totally different things. A Hindu marriage traditionally is a union of families. It is where, that is why you also have some resistance, some natural resistance to intercaste marriages. I'm not making a moral objection to it. I'm just saying that there is a natural resistance to it because there is some degree of issue with families getting, the compatibility between families. So if you look at Hindu marriage that way, that it is actually a union of families and not just marriage in the modern sense, then you get the answer of why there is so much resistance to getting a Muslim bride, because she will never assimilate, and the other part of the family, वो उसका तो कोई question ही नहीं है. So I hope that answers.
May I pose a few questions? Is that okay? Okay, Harsh Jaiya, please carry on. Yes.
Yeah, I'll make a very quick point in 30-40 seconds about this. I think it's very important not to conflate Hindu unity with homogeneity. I think that is something that is an Abrahamic worldview. I don't think that Hindu unity kind of presupposes homogeneity. For example, on Sabrimala, I also supported having the custom remain as it is, and obviously Sai worked on the case from a legal point of view. So my point is, it is important not to conflate at the same time, similarly, sampradaya with jati. Sampradaya, I think, is about my faith or my rituals or what I believe. Even if I've never been there, I can go and develop a lifelong respect and worship for something, for a temple in Kerala, even though I don't live in that part of India. So it is not, in the same household, for example, I am Shiv Bhakt. I don't pray to Hanuman much. My mother prays to Hanuman. My father has a photo of Ram in his cell phone. I have never done that. For me, somehow Shivji has been much more fascinating. So the idea that Hindu unity will force all of us to believe or act in a similar way, even within the same family, I think it needs to be discussed a bit more. And the sampradaya part should not be conflated with the jati part. It is true that if in a Muslim or Christian context, unity will mean homogeneity, because otherwise you'll have schisms. And therefore, I don't think Ashish, with due respect, should, and I'm not saying he's deliberately doing it, should not be allowed to get away by saying unity is homogeneity. It is most certainly not.
Ashish, another point I would like to just add to what Harsh has said. Why this, if there is so much harmony, why it should lead to Hindu unity by itself, right? If I am supporting Sabrimala devotees, then it's unity by itself.
No,
by
exactly.
definition.
That is the thing. That is the thing. I mean,
Let's wrap this segment up quickly, because then we won't leave anything for the last segment where we are going to have a free-flowing discussion.
Okay, no. So the question of Hindu unity again. I mean, and I speak this from experience because I've created enough content regarding the cases that we've fought through People for Dharma and Indian Collective. And so, I mean, the kind of reactions that you get, for example, the recent case of Pashubali ban, right? And the kind of reactions that we've got, that this is a primitive practice from Hindus, from Kattar political Hindus. So there is clear evidence that the political Hindu, by and large, does not anymore understand the idea of harmony between sampradayas and harmony between sects. And this is something that needs to be said again and again that we need to bring back that harmony, which will, of course, lead to political unity. But if
I support
we
Pashu Bali.
bulldoze our way,
As a political Hindu, I support Pashu Bali.
Can I just step into the picture now? I just have a couple of questions. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, let's ask. Let's ask questions to each panelist.
Yeah.
One. So the first is Arihant.
Actually, I will start with Raviji because there is a question that I think Raviji needs to answer, if it's okay. Yeah.
Are we going randomly then? All right, then ask Raviji.
Yeah.
So, Raviji, I think it's important to clarify this particular issue because you seem to make the point that there is some kind of an umbilical cord that connects Jati and Sampradaya. And you've said that if you effectively destroy the identity of Jati, then you translate to eradication or erosion of certain cultures or practices associated with it and ways of life associated with it. Yes. And this Harsh effectively refutes by saying that it's possible for him to be a part of the Hindu identity and move fluidly from one particular sampradaya to another without being excluded. Okay. Now, Harsh, here I have a point and I'll ask my question as well. So I don't want you to think I'm being sly about this. I'm being blunt about this. Okay. As someone who's argued the question of religious denomination before the Supreme Court and tried to introduce the issue of sampradaya, my understanding, which I'm opening it up for any kind of question, is that there are founders of a sampradaya who have a direct nexus to it as a consequence of the history that they have inherited or as a consequence of the lineage that they belong to. Okay. The difference is that these people ultimately become the torchbearers of that particular sampradaya and they keep that particular tradition alive. Whereas people like you and I who don't belong to that particular sampradaya have the freedom of stepping into that sampradaya for the purposes of visiting that particular institution and then getting out of it and then going back to whatever we fundamentally believe in. So for instance, I happen to be a Tambram of Shaivite denomination, so to speak, but I am entitled to go to Sri Rangam, and when I go there, I practice the rules of that particular temple and I get out of it. And when I get back, I go back into my home sampradaya. However, the ones who run that particular institution are the ones who have traditionally inherited that particular way of life and lineage. Okay. Now, if that be the case, don't you think that somewhere we are conflating our freedom to enter other sampradayas with the basic fact that sampradayas themselves represent certain lineages which have been passed on hereditarily, which is why every sampradayic institution has had the concept of a hereditary trustee, so that there are some people who continue to take on that particular lineage. And here I'll give you one simple example, and I will open it up for both responses and questions from Harsh as well as Ravi. Okay. In Tamil Nadu, the maximum number of idol thefts happen in those institutions where the trustees are not hereditary, because for them, the maintenance of that institution has become a transactional experience. Because if you happen to be a hereditary trustee, ये आपके family की विरासत बन जाती है और एक डर पैदा हो जाता है that you have a personal relationship with that particular deity, okay? And therefore, any kind of violation of the covenant with the deity will result in, let's say, visiting of the wrath of the deity is the fear, which is why idol thefts are typically less, statistically speaking, in those institutions. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I am saying it does happen, but by and large, it's an exception because there's a family connect and there's a traditional connect. Okay. Now, this takes us to Raviji has to factually answer this question. One, really, is there a connection, okay, between Jati and Sampradaya historically? Because you were the one to bring in history into this picture, and then Harsh has a point to make on this particular issue. Let him respond to it.
I would say Jati and Sampradaya have a very, very strong connection, because see what Harsh talks about, they are the the superstructure, Hanuman or Ram or Shiva. These are superstructure deities, not specific to a particular community in India now, among the Hinduism. I will give other examples. Let us take the case of the Arya Vaishyas of Andhra Pradesh. They have a specific Devi, Kula Devi called Vasavi Devi. Now, Vasavi Devi is worshipped only by the Arya Vaishyas. I have no idea. I don't even have any idea what the Purana of the deity is, how she came about, why she is worshipped, and what her rituals are, what are the special days, for her. Similarly, you have Padanatambadi Karupan in, Madurai, who is actually a Kshetrapalaka of Vishnu temple, but the deity literally belongs to the local color community. That deity might be a Kuladeva for other communities, but the colors have.
Where does the community fall in the 4 castes? Where do they come under? What do they come under?
Well, the Vaishyas, Arya Vaishyas are actually Vaishyas. The colors are a martial community. You can place them as Shudra or as Kshatriya based on whether they have Upavita or not. So, as I said, it's a fluid system. But the point is, each of these jatis have their specific deities, their specific rituals. And if you're going to destroy jati and say that there is no jati henceforth, the problem that arises is most of these people's faith and lives revolve around these jati deities. When they have a problem, they immediately go to their Kuladeva. They don't go to some Vishwanatha and Kashi or Jagannatha and Jagannath Puri. Let us be blunt about it. You go to your local village deity, you go to your Kuladeva. Even in practice, when you go to some Jyotishi, the first question he will ask you is, have you done proper Shanti to your Kuladeva? With any problem you go. So you are trying to hit at the very root of the faith of these people. And if you don't have any kind of a system which can, replace it, and I'm sorry, you cannot replace it in a single stroke unless you're going to convert them to some other form of religion. And I'm telling you, that is the kind of violence which Abrahamic faiths do, we should not be doing. So you can have intercaste marriage if you want. You can have, of course, we are having all these things. Of course, we don't follow jati-based occupation, but you cannot destroy jati as an institution. That's the first thing. And a follow-up thing to Harsh. Harsh, just one moment. I actually wanted to speak on this. When you said that today the situation is far better than the past, I'll tell you, this is not the first time all these liberal rights or women's rights have come up. It is a process. It is a wheel. It goes up and down. 4,000 years ago, all your liberal ideas, women's rights, everything was available in Babylon. 2,000 years ago, they were available in Rome. Once the empire of Rome came up and the emperors were trying to keep the place together. But, there is a very good book by J. Unwin. It's called Sex and Culture. You might like to, you might actually want to go through it. The idea is that there is a pattern. There is a pattern on all these things. It is the change happens according to the requirement of time. Something comes up, then it vanishes. Something comes up again. So don't think that it is, something is better than the other. It is actually a result of the historical requirements. That's it.
Harsh, over to you. It's up
Yes,
to you.
okay. I think. Thank you, Raviji, and thank you, Sai, for a very nuanced question and kind of playing the devil's advocate to both Raviji and me. So I'll answer the question. I think we need to there were two conflations, right? One conflation was between Sampradaya and Jati. The other conflation was between unity and homogeneity. Now, even within Sampradaya and Jati, there's another conflation that we are doing wrongly. What we are doing wrongly is we are conflating the management of the temple, the owners who are running, as you said, the family which is running that, the murti, the temple, the kuldevta, with the broader community that may or may not expand beyond birth-based lineage, which wants to follow that. So you are absolutely right, and which actually goes to how we need to reform the temple-based system on which you and I had a heated discussion today. So and which I mentioned that Rangesh's piece along with Amar's piece, and I actually mentioned that along with their piece of local voting for Hindus, I actually support super delegates, even if it is caste-based, based on the historical rights and customs of those who used to take care of that mandir. Super delegates, for those who do not understand, is a term people who get slightly more votes per person. Generally there is one vote, one person. I'm saying super delegates, for example, they happen in the US Democratic primaries. There are some people, some eminences who get more votes. So therefore, I agree with Raviji. Don't change it in one system. There is too much violence in Abrahamic system. I'm happy to do radical goals in conservative measures. Small r, small c. No worries. Now, therefore, it's important to understand, before I come to the gender and sex point you mentioned in the second half, Raviji, it is important to mention that even if I go, for example, if I'm visiting all the Shiv mandirs in the country, and who have different histories and different kind of mappings to the local gods. This is in Greco-Roman philosophy, it's called henotheism. Henotheism is basically mapping one particular kind of god to a local god, which is basically exactly what we do, and which is why our system is so beautiful, harmonious. But if I want to go through all that and I want to pay my respects, luckily the beauty of Hinduism is nobody's going to stop me. Nobody's going to say, is this your Kul Devta or not? Otherwise, you can't enter the mandir. So I believe that I can be part of that sampradaya, even if with not as much intensity as people of the jati, especially within the jati, those who are the management of the temple. And even if we then denationalize the temple, we can give them something more than equal importance. And that can be a conservative process, which over time can become more and more democratic. So I don't think there is an intrinsic conflict between jati and sampradaya. Why? With due respect, the way perhaps you have shown, Raviji. Now, quickly on the point of women and rights, I agree with you. Nothing is linear. Nothing is teleological. Many things are up and down. Nonetheless, as of at this point, so I am not predicting the future. I'm not being teleological here. I'm not being historicist here. I'm saying as of now, I think it is objectively better, both in terms of people from so-called lower castes, as well as people from the female sex or gender. Even between sex and gender, there is a lot of political discussion if you go by the T of LGBT these days. I think in both the concepts, there is a remarkable improvement, in my view, objective improvement compared to what was there in the past. It may fall again in the future. In the past, we may still have been better than Europe or China. That's fine. But within India, we are better off compared to what we were in the past, no matter what the future is.
No, but can I make an interjection? 10 seconds. No, but you haven't addressed the issue of the situation of the Shudra women when you compare it to pre-colonial India, right? They were objectively better.
Here, in fact, I have a common question to all of you, and this is built on what Ashish is saying. I think it's important to make this very, very clear. Now, I am assuming for a moment that perhaps all of us are on the same page, that there has been some influence of cultural Marxism in the distortion of Indian history. Okay? If that is something that we admit to some extent, and I'm not going to use that to airbrush everything that was wrong with us, because one, I don't know how much of it was wrong, and are we in a position to say it's wrong? I'm not getting into that. I'm simply saying you can't pixelate everything using cultural Marxism. But if that's the case, is there any particular reason for us to negate the influence of cultural Marxism on caste discourse in India? Because if we say that cultural Marxism has had an impact on all significant areas of Indian life, especially with respect to Hindu life, is there any reason to believe that cultural Marxism has not distorted even caste-related history to the extent of and with the intent of creating a class war and a system of oppression and structural privilege, which is their standard phrase? Okay, Harsh, please start with that, and then we'll have responses.
Right? Yeah. Can I just put in one more question in there so Harsh can maybe deal with both questions at the same time before we move on? So Harsh, in your initial argument, because when I was reading, see, I'm not somebody who is very scripturally aware of what our position was with respect to caste or not. And I will like to, sort of admit that upfront. But initially, your premise was, not in this debate, but before that the Hindu community should do away with caste altogether. Okay? But here you seem to be saying that caste is in terms acceptable when you talk about certain organizations within the Hindu society. However, you stand opposed to caste discrimination. So are you now making a distinction between jati and jativad? Because earlier you gave us a slightly different impression, as if you would want to do away with caste altogether.
I think it's an excellent question. I'll first answer Nupur's question, and then I'll answer Sai's question on cultural Marxism and its impact on historiography of caste. So on Nupur's question first, let me be very clear. I'm not just anti-casteism, I'm anti-caste. I want to see the end of caste. But I'm, despite a lot of anonymous handles thinking otherwise.
Any form of birth-based caste, I'm just trying to understand.
Birth-based. When I say, sorry. So Arihant's point is well taken, a Portuguese word. Whenever I say caste right now, I mean birth-based. Okay, I'm birth-based only. I want to see the end of birth-based caste, not just casteism or casteist discrimination. I want to see the end of it. Having said that, I'm not sure how much state power I want to use in favor of that. That's a separate question. For example, the Indian government actually does give money to intercaste couples where one of the member of the couple, one of the two people are from the SC community. So by the way, the government is already doing that. So I'm not even going as far as to say that we should necessarily do that. I'm saying I want to see the end of it. But despite some rumors in the traditionalist, or what shorthand is called trad internet, I'm not that dumb. I don't want to do it tomorrow. As Raviji rightly mentioned, this cannot be done overnight. That will certainly have a kind of certain kind of almost metaphorical violence to it. But my end goal is clear, which that normative end goal may or may not be shared by Raviji or Ashish, and Arihant, I'm not so sure. Arihant can answer that separately. So I think that answers the question.
Nupur, can you switch off your mic, please?
Yeah.
Harsh, 1 minute.
Ek minute. Harsh, here I think it's important for you to go further, because I think unwittingly perhaps you're setting up yourself for a problem here. Okay. Now, assume for a moment that you have explained, and I think your position, to the extent that I've understood, is clear, that you do want to do away with the concept of birth-based caste. I'm clear about that. I understand that. Okay. Now, assume for a moment that the castes in themselves, or the members of those jatis in themselves, are comfortable with it in the interest of preserving their heritage and in the interest of preserving their way of life. As an outsider to all the jatis that you are not a part of, okay, one thing that they would want to know is, what is your right to expect that or to push towards that? And two, what is the end goal? What is the objective here? Is it Marxist egalitarianism, or what is the end goal here?
Yeah. No, I'll mention that very quickly. First of all, my pushing is only verbal. My pushing is only activist based. My pushing is only trying to convince people. As I mentioned right now, the government of India actually gives 50,000 rupees to a couple which gets married, one of whom is an SC, and one of whom is not an SC, within the Hindu community across various states. And in fact, I think the amount has been increased of late in some states. I am not even going to the extent of supporting that. So it should be very clear that my end goal is to be achieved by persuasion. So I'm not at all saying that this should happen because of some statist social engineering. I think that's very clear. So I think what I think is, I think with modern urbanization and capitalism, this is inevitable. I think it is inevitable within 2 generations. I am just trying to provide some kind of moral and normative cover in however insignificant a way as one individual is insignificant. So it should be very clear. I'm not even arguing for a statist support to it, even though that already exists. And I am saying normatively, I want to see the end of it. I will only talk about it. And as a separate analyst, not as an advocate's hat, but as an analyst's hat, I think it's likely to happen the way, if I see the way economic growth is going to happen, the way women are going to be financially independent, I think it's likely to happen in 2 generations. Before I come, Ashish, once again, I just quickly want to answer Sai's last question, because I think it is an important question. He asked that we all agree to varying extents that cultural Marxism has exacerbated dharmic or...
I'm so sorry. Aapne inevitability ki baat ki based on capitalism, which I understand. And
my understanding.
Yeah, of course. On the basis of, see, one, regardless of who respects my skill set as a lawyer or not, I respect your skill set as an economist. Okay, so I'm not going to question that. Okay, because I believe that respect of reciprocity is very, very important. Now, the question I'm asking you is very simple. Let's assume that I take for granted that it is inevitable, okay, and you are opposed to state intervention, and you're looking at persuasion, and you're only expanding the conversation. I understand that. Okay. My question to you was, is that inevitable desirable? Do you believe in it? If yes, why?
Yes, I think it is desirable. I think it is perfectly fine. For example, large parts of, not all parts, but large parts of urban India are already living like that, especially in the younger generation. I don't think they're any way less Hindu, despite the stereotypes of South Bombay or South Delhi being woke and more concerned about the Second Amendment of the US Constitution than the Second Amendment of the Indian Constitution and all that. You know, we can all laugh about those jokes, but I'm perfectly fine. For example, the question can be, I'm not saying you want to personalize it, but I can perhaps personalize it and say the question is my lived experience necessarily undesirable in a quote unquote Hindu and Dharmic bracket or parenthesis? And I don't think it is. I think it's perfectly fine. People can therefore go to various mandirs. Those various mandirs, as I said, can continue to have a certain special right for certain families and lineages, which may be caste based, but within my philosophical framework, I can see it as a property right. I don't have to necessarily, you will always be a father's son by definition. So I don't have to see that because it is going through a caste. I can see they have some super delegates or some extra voting as a historical acknowledgement of their fiduciary rights can go through what is effectively caste in some cases, but is effectively a property right in my worldview. So I think it is perfectly desirable. I want to see it. I think that will lead to an explosion of sampradayas. I think it will lead to many different kind of modern day gurus who perhaps more orthodox people would reject. For example, the Shankaracharya of Dwarka said Sai Baba is not a Hindu. Said worshipping Sai Baba is not a Hindu. But I know many Hindus who go and worship Sai Baba. They don't feel un-Hindu. So now, what is Sai Baba's caste? I don't know. So my answer is yes, it is desirable. I think it is inevitable. I'm not even advocating for state support. I'm advocating just based on my persuasive powers, however big or strong that might be. Before coming to Ashish, I'll just answer your earlier question about cultural Marxism and how that applies to historiography of caste. As we all nodded our heads that yes, to some extent, cultural Marxism is there in Indian discourse. It has infiltrated Indian discourse, and it will try to deliberately or sometimes less consciously pick and choose on Indic and Dharmic fault lines to exacerbate that, to divide that. Let us be very honest that what has happened in 2014 and 2019, by the way, it is an interesting thing for a political an analyst to do that. I think it's the first time in 2019 where the majority of Hindus who voted, that guy became the prime minister. Because you see, Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi never got 50% of the votes. And it is fair to assume a large part of their support came from the minorities. It is probably in 2019, for the first time, the guy who got the majority of Hindu votes became the prime minister. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that has happened as caste is weakening. That despite all kinds of economic problems, the Hindutva flag continues to politically rise. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening while caste is gradually weakening. So while I admit that certain atrocity literature might be created and in fact is being created, some Dalit Lives Matters are deliberately linking themselves to Black Lives Matter in the US, and they're kind of fancying themselves as a MLK junior, and that kind of context does not apply to India at all. So however, because certain people have exaggerated a reality, that does not mean that a smaller version but nonetheless very brutal reality still existed. So I think we all have enough nuance to acknowledge that while some people who are not our well-wishers are exaggerating certain things, some version or a reduced version, but still very brutal, of that thing still existed. So my point of view on that is very clear.
Harsh, sorry, Ashish, can I just ask a couple of follow-up questions before we go ahead? Sure. Otherwise, I'm sure I'll forget. So, Harsh, a couple of questions from whatever has been discussed between you and Sai, and please consider me a layman, okay? So I might just make mistakes in interpretation.
Please be a
feminist. I will never consider you a layman.
You're a lay person. You're not a layman.
Lay person, lay woman. Anyway, so I'll ask her.
She/her.
Okay, y'all are not allowed to pull my leg on my channel. Stop it. Reserve it for later. So, so Harsh, you said that you're okay as far as temple property is concerned, going to certain caste-based families because that's what the traditional property right is, right? No,
I did not say that. I said that local Hindus, I was referring to the Swarajya article by Rangesh and Amar, who wrote that basically local Hindus, if a temple is being denationalized, local Hindus should get a vote in that. So that is my starting premise. I agree with that, which was never existing earlier. I am saying to make it slightly more, the transition slightly more acceptable, to get this radical aim in a slightly more conservative way, you add super delegates to the family that used to be the fiduciary trustees of that particular temple before they were nationalized de jure or de facto, for example, under HRC in Tamil Nadu and so on and so forth. So I'm saying, but that does not mean, but that does not mean that larger Hindu community will not vote on the management of that particular temple.
No, 1 second. But you're saying you're okay with the super delegate being caste-based, correct?
Yes, because in my worldview, for some continuity, what you can say, I'm not seeing that as a caste-based. I'm seeing it as a property right, because when a certain Purohit in the 1800 or 1700 was given an expectation that if you just work at this, your children will be able to make a living, and they have a certain love to the deity, which I fully agree with Sai, or at least Raviji, that there is a certain, I think Sai also mentioned it, because of that certain love, the statistical chance of that murti being stolen is lower. So acknowledging that, but I want that percentage of super delegates to decrease, but over time.
No, that's fine. What I'm trying to understand is if the person can be based on caste, for example, that's what you're saying, for the transition to be easier, the community that is voting on who should take care of the temple and what traditions of the temple should carry on are essentially the devotees of that temple, correct? Are the ones who are going to
Actually, the proposal says all Hindus in that geographical area. Actually, so proposal actually does not say devotees. It is implied. It is assumed so.
It is assumed that all the people who are voting are going to be devotees and followers of the tradition of that temple. Now, I am putting forward a hypothetical.
No, I'm not sure that they will be followers of that tradition. Actually, I'm not. That is an assumption which we cannot make.
Okay, so then are we saying that Hindus who are not followers or believers of a specific temple tradition get to vote? For example, if
Yes.
I don't have faith in Sabrimala tradition, I don't have faith in Lord Ayyappa, even as a Hindu, should I get a say on what should be or should not be followed by the devotees of Lord Ayyappa? See, we are talking about a very diverse religion like Hinduism. This we have to keep in mind. We are not Abrahamics, right? So, should I get a say in what the devotees of Lord Ayyappa can or cannot follow as a Hindu, but as somebody who has no faith in the in the traditions of Lord Ayyappa, in the traditions of
my simple answer to that. Okay.
Let me complete. That's one. Two, if we have Hindus voting as to who should be the caretaker of a specific temple, you are saying you view it as a property matter. I agree. However, if that person is if that person is being elected on the basis of caste, and hypothetically, if the traditions of that temple says that that temple will allow or disallow people of a specific community, negative and positive, where do you know where that caste caste consideration begins and where it ends? Which is why I asked you, are we making a distinction between jati and jati vad? Okay, because if
No,
jati, please continue.
Yeah, I understand both the points. I'll say the first point. First point is very simple to answer. The point is we don't know what happens in the hearts of men and women. So if you're going to have a governance system which gives right to all the local Hindus, you can theoretically say only those devotees of temple X sign up. I think that's fine as a first filter, but there is no way to know what is happening in Nupur's heart, whether she's actually a follower. Maybe she's a rebel at heart with respect to that temple's traditions. Nonetheless, she's a locally located Hindu. If she signs yes, and then she gets to vote. So I think that's a very practical point. On the second point, I think it's again very simple. Indian jurisprudence, because of its essential religious practice and all that, is a big mess right now in the sense that what I think is what will be applied to a secular place. For example, if you do not allow a person of a certain caste to enter a certain restaurant, I'm not talking about the sanctum sanctorum, I'm talking about the temple, the entire temple structure as an analogy to say a restaurant. If Indian laws do not allow a person of a certain caste to enter a civil or secular establishment, I think in my understanding of any good jurisprudence, that should apply irrespective to even religious establishments, not just Hindu, but also Muslim, Christian, etc., and so on and so forth. So my answer to your question about if there is a possible chance...
Temple is not a secular institution.
No, I'm not saying it's secular. I'm saying the rules that...
Secular institution, it should apply equally or even more to a religious institution. That is his argument.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, my point is it should apply to all institutions, period. And therefore, that will take care of any extreme step of saying no to any particular caste entry because a certain backdoor entry has been given through super delegates. So I think my point on this is how do you design a new governance structure? My broader point in this is we all have to be flexible and we have to work out a system which, while radical, remains some sense of continuity. So I mentioned that in response to Raviji that I don't want to stand up and burn all things just because my point is I'm ready to compromise on that. My normative North Star remains that there is no caste in terms of entry, exit, or present.
We'll go on arguing, so I'm going to let go of this point. And I'm just going to say that I do not agree with the application of secular rules to religious places. not just Hinduism, whether it's Islamic institution or a Christian institution. What you said, that the secular rule should apply to religious places, I just don't agree with that.
एक minute. May I just make just 3 points? I think this is open for everyone. And Harsh, wherever you think that more questions are being directed at you, please stop at it. The basic point is this. Harsh's point about hereditary property rights, especially caste as a hereditary property right, is precisely the manner in which it has been implemented, and that's precisely why the hereditary role is seen as a heritable, successionable right. Okay, so for all practical purposes, caste, at least as viewed by Indian jurisprudence with respect to temple institutions, has been in the context of a heritable right. Okay, so the moment you assume that this is a heritable right and it becomes a property right, the question with respect to interference with a property right in the name of anything else becomes a higher standard for the other person to establish. Because if it's a property right, you need to have specific and very good reasons to interfere with that particular property right. Okay. Now, I'm not going to apply this concept of a property right in spaces outside the temple, because that is where caste has a very different societal role altogether. But with respect to religious establishments, it translates to a very specific heritable right. And that's exactly how. So if you look at all these denominational rights, how they operate, whether it's a Brahminical denomination or a non-Brahminical denomination, they typically have a scripture where the deity of that particular temple is seen as having given them a promise that you shall henceforth control this particular institution. Okay. And that is precisely what gives rise to the concept of a denomination in the Abrahamic sense and as a sampradaya in the Indic sense. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, Harsh, perhaps you may want to consider that even the position of a super delegate in the structure that you propose is still recognizing the superiority of one particular identity over others with respect to that particular institution, because they have a relationship with that particular institution. Yes. Right? So we still approve of, or at least end up institutionalizing some form of caste structure or a class structure, even in the structure that you propose. Right?
Yeah, okay. At a lower level, but that's how you transition. That's how I'm proposing as a transition.
In the proposal,
my normative end goal is actually to be in a situation where, for example, all the local Hindus vote and they say, oh, by the way, this family was supporting it, but there is this one very bright young scholar who we think will be able to take care of this murti going forward better. And there should be a situation whereby the large number, if there is a very large majority in the normal adult franchise voting in the local area, the super delegates will be able to be overcome so long as there is a very strong majority in the one-to-one vote structure. So there's no point getting too technical, because I think it's difficult to explain in a podcast sense what I have in mind.
But frankly speaking, I think an economist's position on the temple ecosystem is very, very welcome, and I think it's very, very important. I just wanted you to consider this for your own consumption when you go back and work on this proposal. Okay. One, the concept of a private temple and the concept of a public temple is recognized by law. So therefore, the administrative structures are different there. Okay. Second, the concept of a denominational temple and the concept of a non-denominational temple is also recognized. Now there is a cross-pollination between each of these four categories, and it gives rise to multiple categories. Okay, so the law as well as the administrative structure cannot be identical with respect to each of these categories of religious institutions, and because then unequals will be treated as equals, which again would be a problematic issue, both from an economic standpoint, from a right standpoint, as well as a relationship standpoint. This is something that you may want to consider. Yes.
I'll just quickly say something, and Arihant wants to go. I'll give a very quick analogy to what I have in mind. For example, for example, last year Narendra Modi's government brought in EWS quota. Right? He brought the EWS quota, economically weaker section quota. So while it was on top of an existing caste-based affirmative action system. So you got, and if you notice, the only people who voted against that were people from Muslim parties in India. I think that's very telling in India, why they saw the danger in that thing normatively being approved, that if this is the foot in the door for at some stage affirmative action, not today, not tomorrow, but a transition, some kind of sunset clause, at some stage, finally Modi's government has been able to get a foot in the door for something which is non-caste based, even though technically OBC is already community, it's not, or class, it's technically not caste there also, but let us take the de facto understanding of that instead of a de jure understanding. So basically, now my thinking on the temple point is, instead of having such a radical proposal, the way, for example, Rangesh and Amar said, which might not see reality, I am more interested in that proposal seeing reality, if by conceding the historical right, while this temple is denationalized, of the family that used to take care of. So for me, the principle of super delegates is just historical continuity. But the non-family local Hindus all getting a vote is a new element inside. That is the foot in the door for something that can be tweaked in the future. So I see that as an analogy of EWS quota, of getting that normative principle approved, because then you can continue to change the ratio of how you want to go more towards caste or less towards caste.
Fair enough. I get your point.
Okay.
Arihant,
So I
Ashish,
just want to make one point. Harsh, the proposal of giving votes to everyone, every Hindu in that one area where the temple is located, I think that will translate into castes, particular castes, which are in majority in that area, hijacking their management of the temple. So what you are going to replace is a family hereditary system, which is, okay, you can say it is caste based, with a system which is inherently casteist in nature itself. So isn't it a contradiction for people who are opposing the caste? Yeah.
I'll answer that. I think again, one of the
Harsh, I have a related question.
Raviji, go ahead. Go ahead, Raviji.
See, the first thing is, even today in politics, caste does exist, and whatever people say, the fact is that even in 2019 elections, caste has played a very important role in most of the constituencies. Arihant may also agree with me, I believe. I mean, those who have been following politics very closely, they cannot deny it.
Arihant has very strong views about that for Haryana, but that's later. That's for later.
Yeah. No, anyway, I mean, you cannot.
So,
you cannot
anyway, coming to the
fact that how much the caste, everybody is crediting BJP for such a brilliant caste, giving tickets to people of every caste, giving representation to so many castes and everything. So how can we say that that was not a factor? We can say that Hindu identity or the nationalism.
No, I did not say it's not a factor.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying
exactly. Combination.
Anyway,
role of caste. Okay.
Can the question?
The point is,
the moderators having to get into it.
You made a thing.
I think we are slightly diverging. So let's just wrap.
I'll come to the question. Yeah. It's about a statement made by Harshi in the past, about temple administration in the past, rather, that there was no question of the general public being involved in temple administration in the past. That is being brought up now. It is absolutely wrong, because one, in most of the major temples across India, the denomination always had a say. Let me be very blunt. It cannot be the normal Hindus of the location, but Hindus of that particular denomination. I will give you the best possible example here, which is very close to my place, Triplicane Parthasarathi temple in Chennai, about 1,400 years old at the very least. Now, this temple belongs to a particular subsect of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya called the Tenkali subsect. Before the government took over the temple, the practice was that there will be 3 trustees. One will be a Telugu guy, because there were a good number of Telugus there. The other will represent, one trustee to represent the priest of the temple. And the third one was required to be a Shudra of that locality. Okay. All these 3 people were elected by the Panchayat of that place. But there was a very clear rule that all these 3 people have to belong to the Tenkalai subsect of that Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. The reason being that it has its own practices, its own rituals, its own restrictions, its own liturgy even. And others cannot even understand where to start and where to end. So the point being that these people will be answerable to the community, but at the end of the day, the administration rested in a denomination made up of people from various castes. So the claim that it was always only with the hereditary trustee, with others not having a say in it, never so. Even in the case of a temple like Padmanabha Swami temple, where people might talk about the trustee being the sole authority, that system has an internal checks and balances. There is a nectar yogam, there is a tantri, and there were always a community of the employees who had a say in the temple matters as well. So never please make a statement that it was all in the hands of a single person or single community. It is
This is
absolutely
for
wrong.
Harsh. Harsh, I'm just merely translating one thing for you to consider, and you respond to that. Okay, please respond to that, and I will not come in the way. See, here's where I think Raviji has answered against himself, and it goes to your point in your favor and in a slightly different way. Now, you see, here is an instance where Sampradaya goes beyond Jati, correct? At least there are multiple castes involved in the administration of the temple, and where what binds them is their belief in that particular Sampradaya. Okay, that's one. Now, please consider this, and this is important in the structure that you're proposing. You see how they have accounted for this is members from different castes of the same Sampradaya have allotted positions, but election is done within individuals for that particular position, as opposed to the rest of the Hindus from the entire district having a brute majority say over the administration of the temple and the structure of the temple. Okay, so like the caste-based electorates that was discussed at one point, you allot specific points or let's say seats, and from within the community there is a election under the assumption that, of course, rebuttable, of course, that all members of the community subscribe to that particular sampradaya and they believe in the traditions of that particular temple. Then what happens is that nuance of ensuring that stakeholders and true stakeholders of the institution ultimately elect devout practitioners of that particular tradition or the sampradaya are the ones who occupy that particular institution. I think my point, and this is for you to consider, it would be incorrect to actually look at this particular issue from the point of social justice. It is from the standpoint of institutional justice. Okay, which is to say, what is the identity of the institution? Who are stakeholders to the institution? What is the basis for their claim of stakeholdership? And how do we ensure that they have a seat at the table when it comes to administrative structure and decision and use of resources? That is the only central contention. And that's precisely why some of these identities will have to be kept alive, because social justice will have the effect of destroying the identity along with their table at the seat. Okay? And now it's over to you. Please go ahead. Yes.
So sorry, Ashish, you've been raising your hand for some time, but I'll just respond to what Sai mentioned.
Yeah,
so first of all, I was about to say this. I was about to say the same thing that Sai mentioned, that Raviji's point in this time, what he very eloquently mentioned, to some extent contradicted his earlier point, right? Because he clearly showed that I'm not saying I'm saying to some extent. I'm sure there is more nuance there. I'm simply saying the one-to-one mapping of Sampradaya and Jati, by the example you gave, was undermined. The one-to-one. That's my point number one, which Sai himself mentioned. Second point is, see, I have 2-3 concerns here. I have 2-3 concerns if we say that only those people who are interested in that mandir. There are 2-3 issues. First of all, historically, the fact that there was a lot more nuance and checks and balances is extremely good. That's what I expected it to be. But I would not be surprised that some communities fell through the cracks. While it was very diverse, it was diverse for, say, Savarnas. It may not have been. Again, there might have been exceptions. Whatever you say in India, there will be exceptions. But as a general rule, that while there was a Shudra, while there was somebody from a martial caste, while there was somebody else from a trading caste, maybe the people who were Avarnas, people who were Dalits or local tribals, they fell through the cracks. And while you're counting them as Hindus in the census, for all practical purposes, that social fraternity is not there. That's point number one on your historical analogy. Now, going forward, I think what Sai is proposing is very interesting. It could be practicable, but there are 2 problems I have with that. First of all, I resent the fact, if at all, I'm not saying Sai has proposed that, I'm saying if it ends up as that I am in a locality, one Hindu is only connected to one Sampradaya. For me, that is an Abrahamic way of thinking. I always give the example, it's well known in Japan, if you add the number of Buddhists, Shintos, and other people, the number exceeds 100%. So first of all, there should not be even if you don't want to do a general population and you want to say, for example, only those connected with that mandir, even if you do that hypothetically, I don't want it to be limited to 1. Now, that does not mean that everybody gets to sign for everything, but it should be some larger number, 2, 3, or 4. You already start seeing the complexities, right? Because I don't want to say that is my only particular temple I care about. Because for me, that conceding of that normative point is something not worth doing, number one. And which is why the general local adult franchise does not have that problem. Now, the other problem is, see, historically, and this is where because we are designing a new system. See, 1905, when France passed the Laicite Act, right? They had a set of Catholic temples which they had to denationalize. In a way, they were going through the same problems in 1905 in France that we are going through now. Although the context was Abrahamic there, the context is Dharmic there, and therefore there is a difference. But they had to go through the problems of what do they do with the Catholic churches that were hitherto under the state. My problem is, if going forward we say only that local sampradaya, I am not seeing a Hindu politicization, because there is no intermingling of those Dalits who were never there in that particular sampradaya, and they will never get a chance to come, for example, and intermingle. So either there should be an online way of saying that I can immediately, that every particular local Hindu has 2 sampradayas he can subscribe to for local temple voting rights, and he can change it at any moment, because I don't want it to be fixed for life. I know that if I go from Calcutta to Bombay, it is very difficult to change my voting ID card. I want to make sure that if I change my sampradaya over time, I get to go from temple A to temple B in locality in terms of my voting. So there are a lot of issues which I don't want to end up de facto accepting the old social stratification. In terms of this, I want to know.
You are saying that despite being an outsider to a sampradaya, you still want some kind of a say in the sampradaya of your choice.
Very explicitly, yes.
Can I just come in, please? So I am a Marwari from Junjunu, okay, traditionally. So our faith is in the Junjunu Mandir, which is the Rani Sati Mandir. So we worship the Sati Mata over there, okay. No matter where I am in the country, my Kula Devi and my faith and my, everything is going to be connected with the Mandir in Junjunu. Now, tomorrow, if I up and about get up and say, all right, I think I'm going to change and I don't want to believe in that anymore. I'm going to now start believing in some other temple. I'm going to now, I opt to be a devotee of, Kalima. I opt to be a devotee of Kalima, and I deserve a voting right as to whether Bali should be Bali should be carried on in her temple or not. Why should I get that right specifically when we are talking only in the structure of the voting system that you're speaking about? Otherwise, Hindus are free to believe in whichever deity they wish.
Yeah.
But
so,
how can we have this fluidity that whenever I want to vote in the traditions of any temple, I can up and about on a whim change my sampradaya, is what I'm trying to ask you.
No, so my point is very simple. As Hindus, if you're allowed to change your belief or the focal point of your belief, or at the same time believe in multiple things, then you are allowed to. Now you are using a possible situation where somebody is doing this cynically. Now that point is there. That danger remains. That danger remains even with the historical patrons or the fiduciary trustees of that temple. So this whole point, by the
birth Hindus should be allowed to have a say in what happens in Sabrimala. Are we saying that?
No. We did not. No, we did not even go that far. We did not even go that far because the starting point was local Hindus. For the starting point was there are 2-tiered structure where all local Hindus get a vote in all local temples, but the historical fiduciary trustees of that temple get super delegate votes in that temple. So there is no question of me suddenly voting in Sabrimala because I don't live there or I don't have domicile there.
When you go from Calcutta to Mumbai, you need to know that you can change your sampradaya at will. That is the point of contention. That then now SJW from South Bombay, who is Marwari by birth, who has no idea about the temple traditions of Sabrimala, for example, can up and about go and say that, all right, now I'm going to have a say in what happens to the traditions of that temple.
Yes, which is no, I totally see the point. There are Hindus and there are Hindus that have maximum diversity, which is why I think the super delegate point makes sure that unless all the people in that voting population are SJWs, one would assume that along with the super delegates and a fracture, because see, I don't think nobody understood. If you are in Sabrimala, there is the proposal that Amar and Ragesh made was that you have local voting rights in a particular geographical area. I am adding on top of that a proposal which I think is more conservative, that you give the historical trustees some disproportional rights, whatever the number.
My issue is not with that. My issue is with the mobility of Sampradaya that you mentioned. My
Arihant
issue
Yes,
and
my-
I have not come on for a while. I think they have a few points to make as well. Let's perhaps
Yes.
give them some opportunity, if that's okay.
No, I am only saying that if a person is living near Sabrimala temple and is clearly not a devotee, and if a person is living 500 kilometers away from the temple and is a devotee, the person who is living near Sabrimala should get more rights in or more skin in the game. Why? That doesn't make any
No,
sense.
it can be
actually.
done in today's electronic age. It can be done. That's a good proposal.
Which
It
is
need
why
not
this-
be.
Yeah.
It need not be location based. It could be nationally. You choose which
Then you are
mandirs you
basically
feel.
saying that it should be based only for the devotees. We can enroll
Yes,
the
but
devotees themselves.
but devotees, Arihant, will always be self-declared. There cannot be a litmus test for devotees. So people who will be cynical will slip through. But I agree with you. It need not be
Most
geographical
of them.
based.
Yeah.
Well,
Which is
one
why-
has to assume. One has to assume that. But I agree that your proposal is interesting.
Got
It
it.
need not be geography based. It need not be geography based.
I think
See,
we
there
can
is
move on to
some-
Ashish. I think his hand is going to start aching.
No, so I just wanted to bring it back to a more general debate.
Kashmiri बातें को कोई बोलने नहीं देता. I'm so sorry. Please. मैं बाकी में ना उसके बाहर.
Don't light
So,
a
yeah,
new fire, Sai.
No, so I want to go back and this has been a great session, but I don't want to give this impression of again going back to Harsh has been put through too many questions on temple thing also, but because I was there first, I raised
Slightly
my hand,
louder. Slightly louder.
first, so I'll just okay, yeah, sorry. So my question, I'll come to the question immediately. You mentioned about your first Sai said that about cultural Marxism. I have a comment there. When I go through the study of jatis and caste-based problems in India, I am at a loss to find any credible economic analysis done by Marxists, not cultural Marxists. Cultural Marxists ki to baat chhod do. Marxists themselves have not, which is supposedly their bread and butter. So I don't know what kind of study is going on when it is pretty clear where the problems lie. Now, my question, and I would request Harsh to wear his economist hat here. When you say that you want to obliterate jati, the concept itself, right? So, as an economist, how do you actually, I mean, can you just take us through what you really mean? Because when you say that you want to give up jati, what you're saying is that you want to give up on 2000 years at least of craftsmanship, of skill which has developed over all these years and has come to us as products of some amazing products, whether it is textile, whether it is glass cutting, diamond cutting, kuch bhi le lo, right? So when you are saying that you are against occupation based jati and you want to finish it, don't you think that one, you are giving up on all that heritage that is economic in nature, not even cultural? I'm not talking about the great temples and stuff. I'm just talking about economic. And then you are actually forcing these communities to have a violent clash with modernity, and telling them to now you should also migrate to cities because we are urbanizing, and we are all supposed to be living in metros one day, and therefore you should leave your village and now migrate and work as a laborer in some factory. So don't you think that is what it actually means?
So I'll just answer. I know you were saying it with the right intentions, but it was a bit colloquial. So I just want to kind of paraphrase and make sure the point. I'm not trying to force anybody. As I mentioned, I'm not even sure if I want to use the state's existing policies of subsidizing intercaste marriage. I'm not even sure if I support that. So the forcing part, I think you're trying to say I'm forcibly saying or advocating that I can agree with. I'm definitely not trying to force anybody. I think including through state policy, not
नहीं, force ना हो.
हाँ.
It is okay. But
I'll mention.
the end. I mean,
I understood your point. I'll mention that. I understood. Normatively, that is my end, and I'll explain to you why it's not a problem the way you've mentioned it. See, first of all, a doctor's son can be a doctor. I'm not saying that if a doctor's son becomes a doctor, it's bad. I'm not saying that. My problem was with a system which normatively said that a person who cleans the toilet, his son should not be a doctor. My problem is with that. But अगर एक डॉक्टर का बेटा डॉक्टर बन रहा है, मुझे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. So it's important to understand. Now on the point of in economic angle, which
वो तो खत्म हो
नहीं
चुका है.
I mean it's I mean it is वो trend
you
उस
have
तरफ है.
affirmative action. You have
No,
affirmative
Harsh, can you just also add? You continue with it. I
think-
won't interfere. Answer the question on dignity of labor as well, if you believe that's the case, and you believe that there is a hierarchy of professions also.
Yes, I'll mention that because it can always say, "Achha, what's wrong with cleaning toilets? There is dignity of labor." My point is very simple. There should be choice. Nobody should say कि if you are cleaning toilets, your father cleaned toilets, therefore you should clean toilets. Now, if somebody's father cleaned toilets and he wants to clean toilets, despite being educated, fine. I'm not sure how many will choose that, but I'm fine with that. So let us be very clear, because it can be used, and Sai is right. It can be said, are you against dignity of labor? Do you have a white collar bias? Do you have an anti-blue collar bias? It can be said. So I'm just making that very clear. Now, on an economist angle point of view, I actually don't think the craft heritage and all that from an economic point of view is that relevant for most people. I'm not saying for all people. I think the most interesting economic part of caste, and actually R. Vidyanathan has written a book called Caste as Social Capital. I think that is very interesting of caste. And I say that as somebody who's born in a Vaishya family, Baniya family, so-called Marwari family, not from Rajasthan, but from Haryana. See, I'll tell you what, if I'm today doing small trading and I do not believe in the courts implementing the contract I have with the person I'm trading, because I know practically on the ground, if I go on the route of litigation, then paisa pata nahi kab milega 10-20 saal baad. The only people who will get rich are lawyers, either like Sai or my wife Aki. Right? I will actually get money or not is a long-term question. So for me, even though I may want to trade with a non-Baniya, a person who is from a non-Baniya background, because historically, not in my particular case, I'm saying as a general case, जो बोलते हैं ना कि बेटी खाने का, what is caste on the ground? तो ये बेटी खाने का रिश्ता जिधर है, जहाँ पे बेटी का रिश्ता है, जहाँ पे खाने का रिश्ता है. So historically, the way caste worked, for example, for these mercantile communities was, if somebody gave you dhoka, you could shame them in the biradari. Right? That is how it worked. Now, that is a pre-modern state system. Come to a modern state system where we are transitioning, where if I have a contract with Arihant, let us say, who is not from my caste background, and I know that if Arihant frauds me or if I defraud him, both of us can quickly go to court and get justice on that particular point, then that social capital, while not becoming fully irrelevant, becomes much less important. Similarly, if you have a social safety net, I think you made a point about caste being social safety net, that is historically true. But again, if you now have welfare schemes, which are increasingly, not always, India is not exactly like other country, and increasingly identity agnostic, not fully either caste or religion, but increasingly, like I give EWS as a step of normatively going towards economic or material depravity or deprivation, as a criteria, not identitarian ones. Then that again, caste as social capital, whether in the case of poor people, whether in the case of people who are trading, whether in the case of people who are collaborating on some art projects, becomes much less important. Therefore, a modern state, historical occupations or caste as profession, it becomes very difficult to normally, organically sustain. So Harsh is not trying to force people out of it. I am prognosticating, I am projecting that it is likely to die a de facto slow death. That does not mean that there will be zero people following their professions. That's my point.
Courts today are actually asking people to look at alternative dispute resolution mechanisms without coming to court because our courts are clogged. And tomorrow, courts decide to effectively empower trade guilds or caste guilds. So, for instance, one of the things that I remember, at least from my limited reading of the Mahabharata, is Krishna's belief in the pressure of the Kshatriya community on Duryodhana to improve his conduct when he refused to give them their kingdom back after the 13-year pun. Okay, which is to say there is social opprobrium, there is social pressure from people who you are expected to mingle with. Okay, so in light of the fact, in fact, that's one of the reasons that I strongly believe that institutions such as the Khap Panchayats or guilds have been vilified beyond a point so much, because it clearly tells me that the people who have vilified them have had a clear Marxist bent of mind, who wanted to effectively say this is how the caste system works, the cup is full of people from the upper caste community who effectively have a Gotra obsession, and all they do is to keep going after honor killings. That's all they decided to focus on, other than focusing on all other dispute resolution mechanisms that the Kap Panchayat presents and other opportunities, right? So I am saying that even from the standpoint of dispensation of justice, I'm not saying from a criminal standpoint, of course, the state reserves the sole power over criminal justice system. I'm very clear about that. And that was always the structure before and after the modern state. However, with respect to disputes which are commercial in nature, which are resolvable, so to speak, it is possible for caste, as Mr. Vaidyanathan, Dr. Vaidyanathan actually presents in his book, to be seen as a limited and an immediate, let's say, mechanism to dispense justice. So one, if clearly we have a proprietarial right perspective, you also have a justice dispensation mechanism, you also see it as a safety net, then the only question remains, what is that overriding socio-economic, political, religious consideration that pushes us to kill this structure altogether to say, while it may be inevitable, I also believe it is desirable. That is the only thing that perhaps I think where you and I disagree. Other than that, I think we have fortunately reached the same.
So,
Arihant has been waiting.
I'll quickly mention before Arihant goes, or Arihant, whatever the moderators decide, I'll quickly go first.
No, you go.
Please go.
Okay, so I'll mention, you're right. So obviously now that we're having a nuanced discussion, we obviously find that there are a lot of overlapping analyses, but there is a difference in our normative end goal, and I'll say why. The state penetration during the Mughal times was at level this, let us say level 1. During the British times, it went to level 2. Like, for example, the disarming of the peasantry in the 1820s, and especially after 1857, which Gandhi later called, I mean, the so-called pacifist Gandhi said was the most black letter law, at the disarming of the Indian peasantry. Now we are going to state, what I say, not intervention, state penetration into our lives at level 3 in modern times. You know, there is a very famous book by a Yale scholar called Seeing Like a State. So when you have something like Aadhaar, you have a number, I can go and see that this is the commercial record, this is the medical record, this is the history of driving license. All of that can be come out on a relational database management system on a computer in 1 second today. It was simply not possible even 10 or 15 years ago. And therefore, the question is, while the cup is providing justice, yes, hopefully not on the criminal side, on the civil side, as of the moment, I see it not as a good thing. I see it as a necessary thing for the moment, because quick justice on the civilian and commercial has not reached that level yet. So as a substitute for failure of state capacity, it is better for somebody to dispense some imperfect justice, better than there being anarchy. But the problem is that while people will focus on the honor killings, while people will focus on the patriarchal or the caste angle, those realities are still there. So would we not want, ideally, if the state capacity improves, that Khap Panchayat dispensing system also be replaced with a modern state system? But so you can have the nuance of acknowledging that it is providing civilian justice albeit in an imperfect sense. But why not the normative end goal being that you actually have proper state-based justice, even for non-criminal things, at the local level in a cheap, transparent, and fast manner? So that is the normative idea where we, I think, disagree.
Now, the same manner in which you took a position with respect to Khap Panchayats, where you said it is a necessity and more of a moral judgment, okay, wouldn't you agree that was the same tone and tenor in which Ashish effectively put out his tweet, wherein he said this was more of an exigency as a safety net and necessity of that particular cycle, and he wasn't taking a moral position on that? Just one. Second, assuming that Khap Panchayat actually has a lot of what's, and I'm not going to be the one to pixelate or airbrush it, are we saying let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, or shall we address the issues with that particular system as opposed to completely rendering it redundant and infructuous? Because the way forward across the globe is decentralization of dispensation of civil form of justice in every jurisdiction as much as possible, because the state has proven to be completely incompetent, useless when it comes to dispensation of justice at every level. The state has an interest today only in dispensing justice if it hogs headlines and if it has political mileage, But otherwise, the common man, I say this with a lot of responsibility of 11 years under the belt, is sick and tired of coming to the courts. Sunny Deol remains right even today after all these years of Damini. Okay, that's a fact.
So I'll very quickly respond to that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where we are disagreeing, because obviously Sunny Deol's image of Tariq after Tariq, Tariq pe Tariq is the reason why the common person is sick and tired of the judiciary, and hence institutions like the CUP, the pre-modern institutions like the CUP, are filling in that vacuum. That does not mean that we say because the vacuum has already been filled, let us not double down on making this justice more easily, more rapidly, more transparently, and more affordably available. You see the difference. We can acknowledge that. So my point is that therefore I want the end goal that the average person in a village or a small town can go to a local justice, say, this was our agreement, this is the agreement, I have been defrauded, and this is what the contract says, I need to be given this. Or for example, once the land records get digitized, a large part of the fights go away. So because then the problem is we cannot, as you rightly mentioned, pixelate away the warts of the kham panchayats, where somebody says, agar aapne intercaste marriage kari hai, therefore aapko is village se nikal diya. It is not acceptable. Therefore, we have to go towards a modern sense of justice while recognizing that in the transition, the vacuum is being filled by certain pre-modern institutions. Now, on the point of Ashish, since you mentioned, I'll agree. I've said very clearly, since we brought this issue back again, I read Kushal Mehra asking Ashish Dhar, what is your view? On that, Ashish gave what was effectively the reason why something existed earlier. Ashish, after that, again wrote that I'm not even sure if I have a view, but I consider reformism to be self-congratulatory bakwas. And there are more to it. So what I saw was that while officially there was a point of not taking a view, de facto, the reform stand versus the traditional stand was abused. And therefore, I think, based on those facts, ex post facto, I was right to come to the conclusion that Ashish supports a birth-based system, while he is refusing to say that publicly and explicitly, which is perfectly fine. If today, right now, Ashish says something different, in a Bayesian sense, I will recalculate my logical conclusion, and I will right now publicly say, well, I was wrong to call you casteist. But because normatively, Ashish has right now, even not right now, said that he disagrees with the birth-based system. Therefore, with all due respect, and not as an ad hominem, but as a descriptor, I stand by my words.
Ashish, before we respond, I'm not on the issue, just one thing.
Yeah.
Harsh, as any practitioner will tell you, the influence of caste and religion in modern dispensation of justice continues in every structure. Neither CAP was an exception, and nor is the current modern justice dispensation an exception. You know this better than anybody else, considering how Hindu traditions have been uniquely at the receiving end of certain forms of intervention. That is not applicable only at the Hindu or the religious level, that is equally applicable at the caste level in several organs without attracting any provisions of existing law. Let me just tell you that who occupies a certain position at which particular level is decided largely, continues to be decided largely by caste arithmetic and caste dynamic almost every place. So 70 years of our experience has proven to be a failure to demolish this creature called caste. That's my humble opinion.
That's fine. And I know Arihant again has his fingers up, but because Sai, you mentioned this to me, I just have to quickly respond. I agree that the present formal state-based justice system is not perfect. I'm not a lawyer, but anybody who's married to a doctor or lawyer becomes a half doctor or a half lawyer. However terribly, I have my own old random rants on the basic structure doctrine and so on and so forth. Having said that, we cannot have a false equivalence between the imperfections of the modern state system and the pre-modern system, for example, the Khap Panchayat. What I mean by that is, and there is a broader point here, and I think we don't want to go into discussion. I also saw a tweet about yours saying we do not trust the state about UCC. But the reason I'm mentioning that point here is because it is connected. 70 years, we as Hindus have had a bad experience where the state is dividing us, but that is not good enough for us to give up on our own state. We are 75 to 80% of the population. How can we give up in an independent democracy on our own state? Just because we have failed so far to get a certain normative point doesn't mean that this is an alien state. there is a conceptual difference between state and society, but the state eventually is being represented by us. And therefore, my difference is perhaps on the optimism about being able to modify for our betterment the state. And that also answers the point on the future of the caste and therefore the judicial modern system.
A strong Hindu social institutional network will result in the creation of a strong Hindu identity state, is my humble opinion. And therefore, if societal institutions and civilizational bedrocks, which effectively stitch this particular country together and the civilization together, are weakened from temple structures to societal structures, to say that our vote will matter ultimately, it will not, because already demographically we are being outnumbered. The only thing that is saving us today is the limited safety net today of the limited and small micro identities that we have managed to create ourselves, because that tells us at least they will come to our support. The reason why the Dalit is able to survive in streets and localities where he's outnumbered by other communities is because in the hope that at least his organizations will come to his aid. I'm not saying that therefore other organizations and other Hindus should not go to their aid. By the way, I believe that's one of the failings, and that's something that we must do. I'm not on that particular issue at all. But
I'll let Arihant.
Arihant,
So,
one sec. I'm going to first pose a question to Ashish because I think our
अरे मेरे को करने दो, मेरा related है
Ashish
इस चीज
पूछ
से.
रहे हो?
हाँ, because
Okay,
खाप को
then
mention
ask
किया,
Ashish.
so I have to come in.
Please ask Ashish.
Yeah. So I just want to point out, because Sai and others also support the diversity of cultures, traditions to be preserved as they are to the most of the extent, right? And we talked about Khap. I just want to tell you one incident and their idea of justice. I mean, of course, there are so many good examples also. I'm just pointing out that there was a inter-gotra marriage where, the people of the same village, they got married, and the idea of justice from the local Khap was to have the girl tie Rakhi to her husband. So what is the extent to which we want them or our local communities empower if it is in contradiction with our constitution or the modern basic human rights or whatever? So how do we reconcile that? How much power to be given to that? And I'm asking this because you also say that you are not convinced about the idea of uniform civil code. So if we are going to have different codes as per the communities, how do we reconcile that they are also in conformation with the today's standards and practices, basic human rights and all that?
ये सवाल किस पे डायरेक्टेड है, मैं उसके हिसाब से जवाब दूंगा. आप आशीष से पूछ रहे हैं या मुझसे?
आशीष, साई, रवि, anybody can answer.
ये तो लॉ में मेरे पे ग्रेड से ऊपर है, तो ये
साई can answer.
एक ही बंदा आंसर कर सकता है.
मैं इसका जवाब दे देता हूँ. ओके, इस पे 3 levels of responses हैं, and I'm partly responding to certain assumptions of both Harsh and you, Arihant, especially you. ये बात मुझे आपको ये जरूर बताना है. Here I would urge you, and this is not self-edification, I would really urge you to read my pieces on decoloniality on this particular aspect, क्योंकि इस पूरे डिस्कशन में 2 शब्दों का बार बार प्रयोग हुआ है. एक है मॉडर्निटी और दूसरा है ट्रेडिशन. ओके, एंड हमने हर बार ये दोहराया है इस assumption को that tradition stands for something which is outdated and anachronistic, and modern stands for something that has contemporary purchase. Okay, I am basically making the statement, tradition followed without any kind of understanding leads to superstition. I'm very, very clear about that. Okay, and the fundamental principle that Hindu Dharma has followed and Hindu tradition has followed is almost similar to the Roman or let's say the Latin maxim, cessat ratio, cessat ipsa lex. The moment the reason for the existence of the law ceases to exist, the law ceases to exist. Okay? तो आप अपने आप से सवाल क्या करेंगे? आज के देश काल समय में ऐसे कितने संप्रदाय हैं, कितने प्रथाएं हैं, कितनी मान्यताएं हैं जो कहां पे लागू हो सकते हैं, और यहाँ पे क्या क्या आप डिस्टिंक्शन स्ट्राइक करेंगे? एक है सोशल लेवल पे, दूसरा है रिलीजियस लेवल पे. व्हाट इज इट दैट वी आर ट्राइंग टू डू? सोसाइटी चाहे कितना भी चेंज करते जाए, एटलीस्ट विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू रिलीजियस इंस्टीट्यूशंस, व्हाट रिमेन्स अ ट्रेडिशन मस्ट नॉट बी इंटरफियर्ड विद, बिकॉज द कैलकुलेशन देयर इज वेरी डिफरेंट एंड सोसाइटल इक्वेशंस एंड सोशल इक्वेशंस आर वेरी, वेरी डिफरेंट. Okay, so In applying what is modern, in applying what is relevant, let us at least strike a distinction between societal spaces, secular spaces, religious spaces, non-secular spaces, and be clear of that particular distinction. That distinction remains all the more valid in the context of a modern state. That's one. Two, how do we reconcile the question of all these decentralized justice dispensation mechanisms with a central state whom we have actually put together and we have decided to be a part of this voluntarily? जिस घर में आपने रहने का डिसीजन ले लिया है और जिसको आपने बनाया है, आप खुद उस पर थोड़ी थूक सकते हैं. Doesn't make sense. Okay. Now for me, there are two ways of going about it. One, the state decides to play an overarching role, okay, and decides to swamp and finish all existing traditional justice dispensation structures altogether to say, I will fill that vacuum. The problem with that is twofold. One, it is going against the current tide of decentralization across jurisdictions. Second, the Indian state is yet to prove to me that it is competent to do so. So there are twofold responses to this. Point number three, assuming that ये सब भी ठीक होता, एक मिनट के लिए ये सोच लीजिए, you're looking at a population of 1.3 billion and you're effectively expecting courts to step into the picture for everything with multiple tiers of appeals, and this is a cost extensive exercise. Okay, so to the extent that the state really wants to enforce a uniform civil code, here's what I would basically say. आप हमारे रिलीजियस संप्रदाय जितने भी हैं मंदिरों को उनको छोड़ दीजिए, उसके साथ छेड़छाड़ मत कीजिए, ये आपके समझ के बाहर है. Okay, point number one. But where it comes to the question of personal laws, my exhortation has not been I'm against the uniform civil code. I've only said I need two things. You're talking of modern state. The modern state is meant to be participative in nature. हमारे साथ बातचीत कीजिए, संवाद शुरू कीजिए आप. जो नेहरू ने किया था वो हमारे साथ मत कीजिए. You ask us, we are stakeholders. Give us the respect of being stakeholders. 3, आपके दिमाग में क्या है ये you please place it before the public. सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक का कॉन्सेप्ट आप यूसीसी में मत कीजिए, इसके रिएक्शंस अलग तरीके से होंगे, सभी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन होंगे, इसका दावा तो मैं नहीं कर सकता क्योंकि सब कुछ मेरे हाथ में नहीं है. चौथा, when it comes to institutions at the village level or anywhere else, my response is going to be very, very simple. Please don't approach them with the elitist nature, let's say, attitude of an urban Indian or an English educated Indian. वो उनको अंग्रेजी नहीं आती है, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि उनके पास दिमाग नहीं है या उनके पास संस्कार नहीं है. Let us not act as two products of Macaulay. Okay, that's one. 2, जहां पे आपको लगता है कि वो हस्तक्षेप एक हद से ज्यादा कर रहे हैं, even then I would say you discuss, and I will tell you why. ट्रिपल तलाक के बारे में आपने जजमेंट के बिना कोई डिसीजन नहीं लिया और जो लेजिस्लेशन आया है वो कोर्ट के कहने पे आया है, वरना भारत का कोई सरकार चाहे कोई भी हो, they will not have the guts to have initiated that particular discussion in the blind, keeping the community in the dark, especially in the backdrop of the Shabano experience. Okay, and the one experience fortunately that the Hindus have stood up together, in fact 2 experiences in my living memory in my 34 years of staying on this planet in this mortal coil, is Jallikattu and Sabarimala, which is effectively telling me that the community is saying enough is enough, don't force us to adopt the never again motto. Okay, talk to us, give us the respect. The top-down approach is the sign of a colonizing power. If you are my power and you're the product of my power, you belong to my society, talk to me, don't take a decision without me. मैं एंड गोल की बात नहीं कर रहा हूं. अगर समझ लीजिए सारे के सारे लोग अल्टीमेटली कन्विंस हो जाते हैं कि खप की कोई जरूरत नहीं है, व्हाई विल साई दीपक अलोन स्टैंड देयर विद अ लाल झंडा, कोई फर्क थोड़ी पड़ेगा. कम्युनिटी ने डिसीजन ले लिया है, बात खत्म. ओके, देयरफॉर there the question will be of reconciling the expectation of participative process with what is it that the state wants to achieve. But most importantly, the state will need to clarify not just what it wants to achieve, why it wants to achieve something, the desirability of something. जब तक उस why का जवाब नहीं मिलता है, I will keep talking like a रक्तबीज राक्षस. I will keep asking this question, जवाब दो, जवाब दो, जवाब दो. That's all I have to say.
ठीक है, ये दिस इज फ्रॉम द लीगल पर्सपेक्टिव साइड. इफ आशीष और रवि कैन टॉक फ्रॉम द moral perspective, from the society perspective, from the Hindu side, so that I am more interested in rather than the legal one.
No, I think I don't have much to say on it because ultimately the nuances of it are legal in nature, and in how you will handle certain cases which are, supposedly in the gray zone, where you would not have, where you would perhaps require a top-down approach. So Sai has touched upon those things, so I don't have anything to add. But generally speaking, I do believe that that justice must be served. Um, that justice, the idea of justice, is itself up for grabs, and unless it is defined by the community, and unless it has the community is empowered to deliver justice to its own members, this top-down approach is basically colonial in nature. So that's my limited.
I think
Okay, so
the
Ashish,
competition is between community, and there are some individuals who are very individualistic in nature, who does not who wants a separate system in place, at least to avail that opportunity. If they don't want to go through the CAP system, if I am part of that community, and if I don't want to go through that, then just like we have in the marriage, I mean,
ऑप्शन कर लो भाई,
Correct.
huh.
स्पेशल मैरिज एक्ट की तरफ ऑप्शन कर लो.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
okay, so I think carp and temples, we've all discussed everything. I think the last point which remains, and I'd like to pose this question, and maybe everybody can get in 2 minutes each of comments answering this question, and also in terms of closing statements, because we've already been at it for 2.5 hours. So I think we should wrap it up soon. See, I don't think any discussion on caste or caste discrimination is really complete till you speak about reservations and till you speak about the equation between Brahmins and the other castes in Hinduism. Now, as far as reservation is concerned, as far as casteism is concerned or caste is concerned, we are saying some are making the argument that caste should end because A, there are certain castes which have birth-based privilege, like the Brahmins, who by birth have that privilege, and hence they are at a better position to discriminate, and hence birth-based caste should end. So, when you talk about reservations in today's modern day and age, I would like to ask all of you, which caste has birth based privileges according to the union, according to the state of India, and according to the constitution? Which caste in today's day and age is given a birth based privilege? Is it the Brahmins or is it any other community? One. Two, if the state itself is extending reservations to one community and not doing anything for the downtrodden of other communities who are viewed as having a birth based privilege, is that reverse discrimination as well? What I mean to say is, if there is a downtrodden Brahmin, he's been given no reservation and no privileges by the state. But if there is a middle class or decently well off SC, ST, they still get the benefit of the reservation from the state. Often the reservation does not pierce through the creamy layer and even reach the Dalits and the SCs and STs who genuinely need the benefit from the state. So what I'm trying to ask is, when you say that caste is going to end in the foreseeable future as the society progresses, do you think the state is absolutely going to let caste or reverse casteism, where you're demonizing Brahmins, where you're demonizing other communities and extending a birth based privilege to a community which I admit has been historically marginalized? But at this moment, the birth based privilege is being extended to SC, STs, and Dalits, not to Brahmins. So this is a dichotomy and this is a problem. I think all of you can get 2-3 minutes each to comment on this issue and include your closing arguments. I hope we can carry on another day. But today, since we've exceeded 2.5 hours, we'll have to wrap up. So we can start with Ashish, please, because even people listening to us are going to kill us if Ashish doesn't speak now.
You do realize that you asked the question for 5 minutes and then told us to answer in 2 minutes.
I was in a debate. I was in a conversation with Sai, Harsh, Ashish, Raviji, Arihant. I barely got to speak. So in the last 5 minutes, I just vomited everything. Now you can have your say and we can end.
Yeah. So first I'll question the notion of privilege itself, and I'll try to do this quickly. When we talk about privilege in the traditional scheme of jatis and varnas, what is the common metric that we're basing that on? Because these different varnas and the jatis that belong to these varnas are pursuing different goals. And like for example, in the modern society, in a capitalistic society, you would use the metric of wealth to determine your place in the hierarchy. In a communist society, you would be how close you are to the Politburo and how powerful you are, even though they claim that it's a flat society. In a consumerist society, it is about consumption and so on and so forth. But in the traditional Hindu society, where Brahmins were not supposed to accumulate wealth, where Kshatriyas were not supposed to start their own business, where Vaishyas could not interfere in the political thing and become rulers. So when you had these neat compartments, then obviously there are no there is no common metric according to which you will determine that privilege. Secondly, I said that I mean this whole notion of Brahmins being privileged is totally bogus. The problems between higher castes and lower castes began, um, got exacerbated, because I don't claim that no conflicts existed in pre-colonial India. That is not my claim. What I'm saying is that when we refer to atrocities as such, these are instances, well-documented instances in certain pockets of India where you had conflicts between different jatis, not necessarily Brahmins versus Shudras or Vaishyas versus Kshatriyas. I mean, all sorts of permutation combination, even in between the lower castes itself. So the whole idea of privilege itself is questionable here. But in the modern sense, when we juxtapose that and use this presentism, then that the problem of defining itself comes into play. The question of reservation, sorry, I'm taking a little longer, but the question of reservation itself, and I'll stick my neck out on this one and say that the reason why we haven't been able to address uh, the caste related problems in modern India is because of the politics of this country now, which is deeply casteist. And because of this system of reservation, which I have, conceptually I am not against, because there is always, it is a mark of civilized society to help and to, to bring up the marginalized sections to a certain level, to closer to and bridge that gap and inequality. But at the same time, the Indian political system has made it pathological, and the whole idea, the narrative of caste atrocities and the way in which data is collected. A lot of scholars have done good work on this, Sufia Pathan and Duncan Jalki specifically, and have they've punched holes in this whole business of caste atrocity literature. Now the point is that the Indian government is continuing these caste-based reservations for vote bank politics, and that is the reason I contend that this caste atrocity literature is getting popularized, and the mainstream narrative is about caste atrocities when it should be about economics and the situation that a lot of marginalized sections are, because of their clash with modern means of production and modernity, and the conflicts, that social conflicts that come out of that.
Um, Anybody who's ready with their closing comments,
Okay,
please
I'll
go.
go.
Harsh. Harsh and
I'll go.
yeah.
See, for me, my closing comments are: I think the Sanatana and Sanatana Dharma is only if it keeps on evolving. Anything that does not evolve is dead. It's dogma. And therefore, somebody like me, not because of my birth-based caste, but because of my professional interest, should not be having this conversation at all. Our gurus, our dharma gurus, should be the ones who, I'm not saying they don't have to lead the revolution, that would be silly to expect, but they should somehow creatively, scripturally. I'm openly saying, even if scripture says something else on caste, I'm ready to reject that particular part of the scripture in toto. Of course, the Dharma Guru is not going to say that, but because they're scholars, they need to creatively interpret it for a reality, a modern reality that we are living in, and it's more likely. So, therefore, if they do their jobs, immature, egotistical, cocksure people like me will not have to do this. it is very important for this to be said. They are not doing their job, and therefore a part-timer like me has to put his neck out. That's point. I think Sanatana Dharma is Sanatana because it keeps on evolving. Number two, I am a Hindu optimist, I am a Dharmic optimist, and I'm an optimist about the Indian civilizational state being controlled by the Dharma narrative. Sai is absolutely right. There are many demographic problems. There are trends which we can all mathematically extrapolate. There is not enough time to go into that, but I am very optimistic about this cohering further. Without adding much on that, I'll leave that point for a moment. On caste-based and therefore birth-based reservation and affirmative action, normatively, obviously, it should go. Normatively, the end goal, since we're discussing about end goal, cannot be a society without caste, but a society with caste-based reservations. Right? As an end goal, what Nupur is saying is absolutely right. Even practically, what Nupur is saying in terms of the creamy layer, in terms of even without the creamy layer, even if you go to the first-timer benefits, a small, I think a report is about to come out that even in the OBC community, a very small percentage takes up a large part of the seat. So there are many problems that needs to be delved into and solved. But yes, normatively, there has to be a sunset clause. This cannot be the final state. I think that on the political side of it, you said there is a poor Brahman, why should he suffer? Which is, I fully agree, which is why the EWS, again, the economically weaker section reservation, it's only 10%, but normatively it was introduced by Narendra Modi before last year's election, and now it is part of a narrative going forward. It is the first foot in the door to have a non-identitarian state-led affirmative action program. इससे पहले नहीं हुआ, and once again the people who voted against it were from AIM, I don't know whatever the full form of the Hyderabad-based party, the guy who Sai interviewed. So imagine the only people who kind of went out of their way to oppose it. You can read into their motives. Why are they opposing it? So the final point in terms, I think the state, large parts of the cup and all that, once these land records get digitized, even villages becoming de facto urban amenities, a lot of the what Sai is calling the decentralized alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, a lot of that part will become formalized. How will it exactly play out? I'm not sure. How law and technology will intersect, I'm not sure. But what we cannot say is, while we should not clamp down from top down against these existing institutions, but that should not prevent us from building bottom up modern state institutions. So that the point what Arihant was saying, if there is a rebel, if there is an individualist who wants to change the narrative in that particular village, does he or she have realistically, not de jure, realistically access to modern state-led justice in their locality? So it's not about putting somebody down, it is bringing the modern state justice system above. And so we cannot give up on the Indian state. It is ours to control. We cannot be pessimistic about it. That is my closing statement. Thank you so much.
Arihant, please.
Okay, my phone battery is just less than 5%, so I just quickly make 2 points. So regarding reservation, I don't think I have seen people opposing SC/ST reservation. The main opposition is against the OBCs, who actually happen to be the people who are mostly in conflict and oppressing the the lower caste or the SC/STs. So that is one point. The main opposition is against OBC reservation. Second, even if we have to have reservation for OBC just because of their lowest economic status or so-called social status, mostly it is because of the political power. Let's accept it for what it is. But even if we have to have that, then the state needs to tell us. It has to tell us what is the basis of reservation. Is it because SC/STs or OBCs are getting reservation because they have been oppressed by the upper castes, or is it because based on the economic status? So that clarification has not come from the state. That's what we need to hear. Second, what is the basis of putting someone in OBC and someone in SC/ST? For example, every year, not every year, every 2-3 years, we hear about the cases of new SCs being added to the scheduled caste and giving reservations, right? Or even promoted from the OBCs to SC/ST. So What are we saying? Were they not discriminated against before, or are they just suddenly we are discovering them, or we have not done the thorough job before? Whatever it is. So these contradictions we have to sort out. Another point is about the data. It is very important that whatever we reservations we give to the people, it is also based on some kind of evidence that they are indeed backward, they're indeed socially, backward, socially or economically. The last caste census was in 1931, I think, right? So we are giving reservations in 2020 based on a caste census on 1930 basis. So how do you support or how do you legitimize the system for the majority of the people? So you have to find shortcuts like giving it to EWS, covering everybody, basically everybody except 3-4% people in the country. You have now covered everyone in the reservation system. So these are the basic things that the state needs to do to at least justify it giving reservations to people.
Raviji, please go ahead.
Raviji, unmute, Raviji,
Unmute.
I'll try to be very brief on reservation. See, I do believe that reservation is required to bring up those communities who are, suffering because of economic disadvantage. The economic disadvantage of many of these communities are because of certain caste-based issues as well, especially post the British takeover, where their economic power was destroyed. So I won't say that reservation education is required because of thousands of years of oppression, but rather because of the past 200 years. I go with Dharampalji on this. Yes, the issue we have facing right now is, I believe, just some 2 weeks ago, there was a report in print which quoted Dr. J.K. Bajaj as well, that 1% of the OBCs, cornered about 50% of the OBC reservation. So perhaps we need some kind of fine tuning there to actually ensure that the real beneficiaries are those who are suffering, and it's not merely a vote bank politics as it is now. Anyway, so that's the crux of it. I just want to end with answering a question raised by Arihant very, very long ago, perhaps in the previous yuga. We came down the path very long. So his question was about missionary zeal of Hinduism. How can we convert people to Hinduism if there is the jati which exists? Before Islamic invasion stopped our navies from going to Southeast Asia and colonizing those places, we were spreading fast. As I said, we were spreading even within India from 2300 BCE. We have been a missionary religion before we were stopped, and this did not happen because we did not have jatis at the time. We had jatis. In fact, this is something which was used even by the Turks. When they converted the Bulgarians to Islam, they created Janissaries. The Janissaries literally became a caste by themselves. Let us be blunt about it. If you really feel that you want to convert people from some other religion back to Hinduism now, you can convert 10,000 people. If you manage to do it, you can create a new caste if you want, if they are from a particular religion. It is not impossible. It has been done in the past. So let us not break our heads too much about it. The second thing, it was about jati and sampradaya. Just one clarification. See, the unfortunate reality is many people don't have clarity on this. A sampradaya literally means a tradition, okay? And there are two traditions which every person in this land belongs to, or at least belong to in the past. One will be his jati sampradaya, what belongs to his jati, his kuladeva, based on his jati. The other will be the dharmika sampradaya. I'll give you one example here. A same person, a Rajput, may be a Vaishnava, a Shaiva, or even a Jain. There are some Jain Rajputs, if people don't know. But at the end of the day, his jati kuladevi will be different. And that is not affected by his following another dharmika sampradaya. Fair enough. So when it comes to a jati issue, only those people belonging to the jati can actually handle the temple or the kuladevi. I will tell the real problem I face, or rather I envisage with the idea given by Harsh or others, is that there are temples where Dalits have complete control. The temples belong to them. The deity belongs to them. It is their Kula Devata. And if you are going to give free voting rights to everyone in a locality, especially in a place where the landed gentry might try to trample upon them, that will create absolute nonsense in the system of affairs. I am not for it. Okay, which is why I stated it has to be denomination based, sampradaya based. Based on the jati, there are certain sampradayas. Based on my dharmika sampradaya I belong to, there is another sampradaya. Let us be very clear about this distinction. And end of the day, I agree with what Nupur said. It is rather a question of jati versus jativad. There is no reason to really destroy jati completely, as I see it, because I don't see a mechanism to completely replace it. Rather, what you require is that the jatis can exist. If they are not going to have any unch nich vedbhav, if everyone is going to go along as friends, I see no reason why that should not happen, or no reason why we cannot have jatis existing along with this as well. I mean, it has happened in the past. It can happen in the future as well.
Just one
Okay.
point, just
I know,
one brief
Arihant,
point. I was just referring to the
Arihant, quickly,
so-called people, Hindus without Varna. Is that category possible? Because there are people in the West, for example, like Tulsi Gabbard. She is a Hindu, but she does not have a Varna, right? So what mechanism is there? I mean, if you can be a Hindu and you still don't have a Varna, right?
Of course, yes, it is possible. Why not? There are a whole number of people and jatis who never belong to any particular varna, to be honest. And varna itself is fluid, by the way. What ultimately resolves is jati. And what I think might happen in the future is, if you manage to convert, let's say, 20% of whites in the USA to Hinduism, then they might become a white jati of Hinduism, for all we know. I mean, you never know. See,
Yeah, in fact, in the first census that was conducted, when they asked people which Varna do you
Exactly.
belong to, they had no idea.
Exactly.
Okay.
Lot of
So I think we've discussed. I know we've left a lot of issues which
I
were
haven't
left.
been including comments.
No. That's what I'm saying. Sai, make your ending comments, but please limit your time.
Arey, bullets आएंगे, bullet points. Okay.
Done.
As someone who believes in reading at the very least, my suggestion would be that we split the history of Jati into three parts. One before the invasions from the Arab world, then between the Arab world invasions and the British period, and post the British period, what has happened. What is actually, what seems to drive our discussions largely is based on the 200 years of the latest material that we have, but not the material before that. And a significant amount of literature has been lost to the ravages of time and history and invasions during the period before that. Okay, that's point number one. So there's a decent chance that we are consuming lock, stock, and barrel everything that the missionary evangelical Britisher wrote about caste politics. This is especially true of Southern politics and the politics of Dravidianism in Tamil Nadu. Okay, the pernicious manner in which the Aryan invasion theory has been used to effectively Aryanize certain castes and Dravidianize certain other castes and pit them against each other is something that I can personally vouch for, given my lived experience. Okay, for all practical purposes, that's my lived experience as someone who comes from that particular place and who's lived in that particular place. That's point number one. Point number two, therefore, I think it's important to understand which part of history we are actually using to create the current justifications for atrocity literature or current justifications for even reservation. So that's point number one. Point number two, we also have to accept the reality that the discussion within the Hindu community is happening with the presence of non-Hindu Abrahamic communities with a proselytizing intent. Okay, we are no more having a discussion between members of the same family. We are having a discussion which is out in the open with everybody else being present who effectively has a missionary zeal who wants to convert. Therefore, the question should be, is our reaction going to be to Abrahamize the Hindu faith so that there is absolutely no incentive to convert into an Abrahamic religion? Or do we retain portions of our history, we retain certain traditions and understand our traditions better and look at what is it that we can draw from the past effectively to address the situations of the present? That is the role of history. History is not an academic pursuit. Point number three, I completely and strongly subscribe to the notion that the structure of caste was effectively a proselytizing tool, but not in the sense of killing a certain deity or killing a certain tradition and then replacing it with a central figure, but to make it as part of a certain larger whole. European style and missionary style acculturation resulted in replacing all local deities with one deity and satanizing every other local deity. Whereas the dharmic form of acculturation has resulted in giving every deity a certain importance and mapping it onto a central pantheon if possible, otherwise giving it its own place and ensuring that you have a Kula Devata, you have a Grama Devata, you have a Nishta Devata, you have whatever. So multiple forms of Devatas are possible. So that's point number 4. The 5th point in terms of reservation is, you can do away with reservation if you're in a position to offer incentives to truly oppressed communities or truly downtrodden communities. And that incentive can come only if the temple is in the hands of the community, because then you have resources. As long as you depend on the state and the politician to effectively do social justice, he is going to use caste arithmetic to come to power and continue to foment caste-based discrimination in one form or the other. And that is always going to result in lopsided form of justice. The only institution which is capable of doing social justice in a relatively better manner is the temple. And I'm not saying that status quo is ideal, nor am I saying that let's go back to history completely. But junking history and to effectively apply the lens of the present to the past may not help. There are enough things that we can learn from the past and apply to the present. The way to address reservation is to truly give them not just economic support, but opportunities of employment, which the temple used to provide for all these communities. Most importantly, the bulk of the people who are downtrodden are people who are weavers and artisans who the British destroyed because of a specific interest. The weaving community was killed because they had a certain interest in cotton trade. Okay. So all these communities have effectively benefited as a consequence of very targeted exploitation and very targeted deprivation. Mr. Shashi Tharoor's book, while he speaks of the depredation of the British rule in India, he doesn't identify which are the communities which actually directly suffered as a consequence of that. When you have that study, you're in a much better position to show what was their position before the British arrived and what happened even after that. When you have that, you will have a significant amount of answers with respect to reservation. But in principle, as long as untouchability in some form continues to exist in this country in one way or the other, I do believe that we have to find a mechanism to deal with it and to address it. And in the absence of a better mechanism, at this stage, I don't see a viable replacement to birth-based reservation. The only thing is, should every other community effectively jump on this particular bandwagon? If so, what is the response? The response can't come from the state. The state is an actor with a vested interest. It has to come from the society. Therefore, dharma gurus, temples, institutions, and societies need to step up. The state cannot be an all-pervading creature because the state has a direct interest in this outcome. The state cannot be trusted with anything. Even the most ideal state in a democratic situation is held hostage to electoral calculations. That's it.
Okay. Thank you to all my panelists. I'll just take 1 minute to say something. The reason why we had this debate was essentially because Ashish and Harsh got into a bit of an argument. By the end of this debate, though we haven't managed to discuss a lot of things like what goes on in the missionary belts, why are Dalits, SCs and STs being converted? Is it because of atrocities which is committed on them in part or in whole? Or are there other considerations? What is the effect of Muslim fundamentalism and Islamic fundamentalism on the lower castes? How do we deal with all this? I think we left out a lot of it, and I'm sure we will continue this discussion. However, at the end of this discussion, what is interesting is that Harsh, who said that unequivocally all castes and all systems based on caste should end, has in part conceded that even with riders, caste-based systems such as khap panchayats or ownership of temples in that community are things which might be necessary. Ashish, who was called a casteist, has conceded that he has no problem at all with reservation to SCs, STs, and Dalits and OBCs. So it is very clear that the discussion is far more nuanced than what it seemed on Twitter. I think Harsh has come, conceded a little. Ashish has conceded a little. So I think we can all end this being friends after all,
I
and
has
without
also
belittle each other. And perhaps we can end this debate looking forward to 5th August, the 500-year-old movement that united Hindus beyond caste, beyond economic strata, beyond anything and any fissure that has ever ailed the Hindu community. So, Jai Shri Ram, and thank
Jai
you to
Shri
all
Ram.
my panelists. Let's look forward to 5th August.
Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
Thank you.
Yes.